The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside Red Ridge on a morning that tasted like copper and coming rain. Eliza Hart stepped down into ankle-deep dust, her black dress already coated gray, and took her first real look at the place that had hired her sight unseen. It wasn't a town, it was a wound. Wooden buildings leaned into each other like drunks, their paint peeled down to gray bone. The main street, if you could call it that, ran crooked between establishments that advertised their business in hand-painted letters. Saloon, General Goods, Assay Sire. A church sat at the far end, its cross tilted like it was asking a question nobody wanted to answer. The driver dropped her trunk in the dirt without ceremony. Red Ridge, he announced, like the name itself was a warning. Thank you. Eliza handed him his fare plus an extra coin. He pocketed it without meeting her eyes. You the new teacher? I am. He spat tobacco juice into the dust. Good luck with that. The stagecoach rattled away before she could ask what he meant, leaving her standing alone in the street with a trunk that held everything she still owned: 6 dresses, 3 books, her grandmother's Bible, and a wedding ring she couldn't bring herself to wear or sell. People stared. Not the curious stares of a small town greeting a newcomer. These were colder. Evaluating. A woman in a faded calico dress hustled 2 children past without a word. A man leaning against the saloon hitching post looked Eliza up and down with open contempt, then turned his back. She'd expected frontier roughness. She hadn't expected hostility that felt personal before she'd even spoken. The schoolhouse stood 3 buildings down, identifiable only by the wooden sign that read "School" in letters someone had carved with more anger than skill. Eliza picked up her trunk, heavier than it looked, awkward in her grip, and started walking. Halfway there, a voice stopped her. You lost, ma'am? The man who'd spoken stood in the doorway of the general store, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He was maybe 50, weathered the way leather gets weathered, with eyes that had seen things and decided not to care anymore. I'm not lost. I'm the new school teacher. That's so. Not a question. The town council hired me. I have a letter. Council's inside the saloon. Most days, anyway. He jerked his chin toward the largest building on the street. Might want to check in before you settle. There was something in his tone, not quite warning, not quite threat. Eliza adjusted her grip on the trunk. Thank you. I'll do that. She didn't. She went to the schoolhouse instead. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, dust coated everything. Desks carved with initials and obscenities, a pot-bellied stove that hadn't been cleaned in months, windows so grimy they turned daylight gray. The previous teacher had left in a hurry, that much was obvious. Papers scattered across the floor, a broken slate, the smell of abandonment and mouse droppings. Eliza set down her trunk and removed her gloves. She'd cleaned worse. By the time the sun hit noon, Eliza had swept the floors twice, scrubbed 3 desks, and discovered that the stove's chimney was blocked with what appeared to be a bird's nest and someone's discarded hat. She was elbow-deep in soot when footsteps creaked on the porch. 3 men entered without knocking. The one in front wore a suit that had been expensive once, before the frontier had beaten it into submission. His face was broad and sun-damaged, with the kind of smile that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. Miss Hart, I presume. Eliza straightened, wiping her hands on a rag that was already black. You presume correctly. Martin Greer. I'm the mayor of Red Ridge, such as it is. He gestured to the men flanking him. This is Silas Hatch, owns the saloon, and Roy Drummond, he runs the mining operations. Hatch was thin as winter, with fingers stained yellow from tobacco. Drummond looked like he'd been carved from the same rock his miners dug through. Thick shoulders, thicker neck, eyes set deep under a prominent brow. None of them offered to shake her hand. Gentlemen, Eliza kept her voice level. I appreciate you stopping by, though I wish you'd sent word about the condition of the schoolhouse. The letter I received made it sound functional? Greer's smile widened. Well, it functions, after a fashion. It's a health hazard. It's the frontier, Miss Hart. Everything's a health hazard. He walked to one of the clean desks, ran a finger along its surface, examined the result. We weren't expecting you so soon. The letter said to arrive before month's end. It's the 23rd. So it is. He turned to face her fully. Tell me, Miss Hart, what brings a woman of your obvious education to a place like Red Ridge? We're not exactly Denver. The question was intrusive, too personal for a first meeting. Eliza met his gaze without flinching. I'm a teacher. You needed a teacher. The arrangement seemed straightforward. Nothing's straightforward out here, Hatch spoke for the first time, his voice like gravel scraping metal. Especially not when it comes to women traveling alone. I'm widowed, Mr. Hatch. I've been traveling alone for quite some time. Dangerous, that. Drummond shifted his weight, making the floorboards groan. Man dies, leaves his woman unprotected. Anything could happen. The threat wasn't even subtle. Eliza straightened her spine. My husband died of cholera, Mr. Drummond. It was horrible and painful and utterly random. I assure you, I'm quite accustomed to things happening. She looked at each of them in turn. Now, unless you're here to help me repair the chimney, I have work to do. Greer's smile finally died. Just wanted to welcome you official-like. Make sure you understand how things work in Red Ridge. I understand perfectly. You hired a teacher. I'm that teacher. School starts Monday. About that. Greer pulled a paper from his jacket pocket. Took the liberty of drawing up some guidelines. Topics we'd prefer you avoid. Ideas that might be unsuitable for our children. Eliza didn't reach for the paper. Such as? Eastern thinking, progressive notions, anything that might give kids ideas above their station. He set the paper on a desk. This is a mining town, Miss Hart. We need workers, not dreamers. You need citizens, Eliza corrected quietly. People who can read contracts before they sign them, calculate their wages, write letters, think. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Hatch stepped forward. You've got opinions. I'm a teacher. Opinions come with the profession. So does knowing your place. His yellow-stained fingers drummed against his leg. Last teacher had opinions too. Didn't work out so well for her. Her? Eliza had assumed her predecessor was male. Margaret Colby. Drummond's voice was flat. Taught here 8 months. Then she left. Rather suddenly, Greer added. The way they said it made Eliza's stomach tighten. Why? Got lonely, I expect. Single woman, no family, nothing but ungrateful brats and their ignorant parents. Greer picked up the list of guidelines, held it out. Think about it, Miss Hart. Red Ridge isn't for everyone. No shame in admitting you made a mistake. Eliza didn't take the paper. I don't make mistakes, Mayor Greer. I make decisions. I decided to teach. That's what I intend to do. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Greer let the paper flutter back to the desk. Suit yourself. But don't say you weren't warned. They left, their boots heavy on the wooden floor, the door banging shut behind them. Eliza waited until their footsteps faded completely. Then she picked up the list of guidelines, walked to the stove, and fed it to the ashes. Caleb Rourke had been watching the schoolhouse since the stagecoach arrived. Not because he cared about teachers or education or the town's latest attempt to pretend it was civilized. He watched because watching was how you stayed alive, and Caleb had spent 15 years making a science of survival. From his position on the ridge above town, the ridge that gave Red Ridge its name, though most people forgot that detail, he had a clear view of the main street. His ranch sat another mile north, accessible only by a trail too narrow for wagons, which was exactly how he liked it. The town left him alone. He returned the favor. Mostly. Through the scope of his rifle, not aimed, never aimed unless he meant to shoot, but useful for seeing, he'd watched the new teacher clean the schoolhouse with the kind of stubborn determination that usually got people killed out here. He'd watched Greer and his dogs deliver their threat disguised as a welcome. He'd watched her burn their list. Stupid. Brave. Probably both. She was small, this teacher. Not in a delicate way. She moved like someone who'd worked hard her whole life, who knew how to lift and carry and endure. Dark hair pulled back severe, plain dress, good fabric but worn. Widow, the stagecoach driver had mentioned at the saloon last night. Young for a widow, probably mid-20s, which meant her husband had died badly because men that age didn't die easy. Caleb lowered the rifle and rolled his shoulders, feeling the old bullet wound pull tight. 3 years since he'd taken that shot, and it still bothered him when the weather changed. The doctors in Denver said he was lucky to be alive. Caleb figured luck had nothing to do with it. He'd simply been too mean to die. He should go. Check the fence line, tend the horses,
This
do the
story
100
was
things a
posted
ranch
on the
required.
channel west of
Instead, he
Betrayal.
watched the
Please
schoolhouse
do not
door,
repost
waiting
it
for
in any
something he
form.
couldn't name. When it finally happened, when 4 boys, none older than 12, appeared from behind the general store carrying rocks, Caleb wasn't surprised. He was just disappointed. The stones. Eliza heard them before she saw them. Whispers and muffled laughter, the sound of children trying and failing to be stealthy. She was washing windows, standing on a chair she'd reinforced with scrap wood when the first rock hit. It missed the window by inches, close enough that she felt the air move. She didn't flinch, didn't turn around. The second rock clattered against the wall. Eliza climbed down from the chair, set down her rag, and walked to the door. 4 boys stood in a ragged line, armed with stones and bravado. The oldest was maybe 13, tall for his age and aware of it, with his father's face visible in his features. The youngest couldn't have been more than 8. "Gentlemen," Eliza said evenly, "can I help you?" The oldest boy, Tommy Drummond, she'd learn later, Roy Drummond's pride and shame, grinned. "You the new teacher?" "I am." "You ain't wanted here." "So I've been told." Eliza descended the steps, hands loose at her sides. "Is that why you're throwing rocks, to emphasize the point?" "We don't need no teacher." "Any teacher," Eliza corrected automatically. Double negatives create positives. What you meant to say is we don't need a teacher, though grammatically you'd want to specify which teacher, me specifically, rather than teachers in general. Tommy's grin faltered. "What?" "You're proving my point about needing a teacher." She gestured to the rocks in their hands. "Are you planning to use those?" The boys exchanged glances. The youngest looked uncertain, Tommy's jaw set, stubborn. "Maybe." "I see. Tell me, Tommy. How'd you know my name?" "You look exactly like your father. It's rather unfortunate for you." That got a snicker from one of the other boys. Eliza continued, "Tell me, if you break my windows, who pays for the repair?" "Don't care." "Your father will. The school is town property. Damages come out of the mining operations contribution to the municipal fund." She had no idea if that was true, but it sounded official. "Which means your father will be angry. At me, certainly. But also at you." Tommy's grip on his rock tightened. "You threatening me?" "I'm educating you. There's a difference." Eliza took another step forward. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to put down those rocks and go home. Monday morning, you're going to arrive at school on time, ready to learn, and we're going to pretend this conversation never happened. And if we don't, then you'll break my windows, I'll report it to your parents, and you'll spend the next month working off the damages while falling further behind in your education. Your choice." For a long moment, it could have gone either way. Then the youngest boy dropped his rock. Then another. Tommy held out longest, his face red with embarrassment and rage, but eventually even he let his stone fall. "This ain't over," he muttered. "It never is," Eliza agreed. "I'll see you Monday." She watched them retreat, making sure they were truly gone before allowing herself to lean against the porch railing. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from the adrenaline crash that followed confrontation, a feeling she remembered from the last days with her husband, when every conversation had been a battle and surrender had never been an option. She didn't notice the man on the ridge, watching through a rifle scope, lowering the weapon with something that might have been respect. Monday arrived with rain. Eliza woke in the room she'd rented above the general store, the only room available, 8 by 10 feet with a bed, a chair, and a window that overlooked the alley where men pissed after drinking, and dressed in her best teaching dress. Navy blue, high collar, no nonsense. Downstairs, the store owner's wife, Mrs. Chen, had coffee waiting. She was Chinese, which meant she faced her own particular brand of frontier hatred, and she hadn't spoken more than 10 words to Eliza since she'd arrived. "Morning," Eliza ventured. Mrs. Chen poured coffee without looking up. "Rain means mud. Children will track it everywhere." "I have a mop." "You'll need it." She set down the pot. 4 children enrolled, maybe 6 show up. Families want free childcare more than education. "I'll take what I can get." Mrs. Chen's eyes flicked up, sharp and assessing. Margaret said the same thing, first week. There it was again, the previous teacher mentioned like a ghost story. What happened to her? She left. Why? Because she was smart. Mrs. Chen gathered the coffee pot and turned away. Smarter than you, apparently. The schoolhouse was freezing. Eliza got the stove going, swept the mud from the entrance, and arranged the desks into rows that looked almost professional. By 8 o'clock, she was ready. By 8:30, nobody had arrived. At 9, the door opened. The girl who entered was maybe 6, small for her age, with blonde hair and 2 precise braids and a dress that had been mended so many times it was more patch than original fabric. She stopped just inside the doorway, eyes wide. "Hello," Eliza said gently. "I'm Miss Hart." "I know." The girl's voice was barely audible. "Mama sent me, said I had to come." "I'm glad you did. What's your name?" "Sarah. Sarah Watts." "It's nice to meet you, Sarah. Would you like to choose a desk?" Sarah chose the one in back, as far from Eliza as possible. 10 minutes later, 2 boys arrived, brothers, obvious from their matching red hair and freckles. They were followed by Tommy Drummond, who slouched in late and sat in the front row with an expression that promised trouble. 4 students. Mrs. Chen had been optimistic. "Good morning," Eliza began. "I'm Miss Hart, and—" "We know," Tommy interrupted. "You told us already." "I told you on Saturday. Today is a new day, which means new introductions are appropriate." She didn't rise to the bait. "We're going to start by assessing where everyone is in their education. I've prepared some simple exercises." "Exercises are for horses," one of the red-haired boys muttered. Tommy laughed. Sarah stared at her desk. Eliza handed out slates. "Write your name. Then write 1 sentence about what you did this weekend." "That's stupid," Tommy said. "Nevertheless, it's the assignment." He grabbed the slate, scratched something, and held it up. "Done." Eliza looked. He'd written Tommy in crooked letters, followed by "I done stuff." "Good start," she said, ignoring the grammatical massacre. "Now write 3 more sentences with proper punctuation." "Why?" "Because I asked you to. That ain't a reason." "Isn't a reason, and yes, it is." She moved to the next student. "In school, I give assignments. You complete them. That's how education works." Tommy threw his slate. It hit the wall hard enough to crack, the sound sharp in the small room. Sarah gasped. The red-haired brothers froze. Eliza didn't react. She walked to the broken slate, picked it up, examined the damage. Then she walked to Tommy's desk and set it in front of him. "You'll pay for that," she said quietly. "Like hell." "Language, Mr. Drummond. You can't make me pay for nothing." "Anything. And yes, I can. That slate is school property, value approximately 25 cents. You can bring the money tomorrow or work it off cleaning the schoolhouse after class. Your choice." Tommy stood up so fast his desk screeched. "I ain't doing nothing for you." "Then leave." He blinked. "What?" "Leave. Walk out that door. Go home. Explain to your father why you're not in school." Eliza kept her voice level. "But understand this. Every town in the territory is getting civilized. In 5 years, maybe less, you'll need to read and write and calculate to get any job worth having. You can learn those skills now, while it's free, or you can pay for them later when you're grown and ashamed. Your choice, Mr. Drummond, but make it quickly. You're wasting everyone's time." The silence stretched thin. Then Tommy grabbed his coat and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Eliza turned to the remaining 3 students. "Now, where were we?" Sarah raised her hand slowly. "Miss Hart?" "I finished my sentences." "Wonderful. Let's hear them." That night, Tommy's father paid her a visit. The threat. Roy Drummond didn't knock. He shoved the door open hard enough to bang it against the wall, bringing the smell of whiskey and rage with him into the schoolhouse. Eliza was grading papers by lamplight. She looked up, set down her pen, and waited. "You humiliated my son." "Good evening, Mr. Drummond. I'd offer you a seat, but you seem content to stand." "Don't get smart with me, woman." He advanced, and Eliza saw what Tommy would become in 30 years. Cruel, bloated with power, dangerous. "You kicked him out of school. He chose to leave after destroying school property. I gave him options. He made his decision. He's a boy." He's a student, and students follow rules. Drummond slammed his hand on her
This
desk,
story was
making the
posted
lamp
on the
jump.
channel west of
I don't give a
Betrayal.
damn about your
Please
rules.
do not repost
You're here
it
to
in any
teach,
form.
not discipline. Discipline and teaching are inseparable, Mr. Drummond. Eliza didn't lean back, didn't show fear. Your son will be welcome back tomorrow if he brings 25 cents for the slate or agrees to work off the debt. He ain't paying nothing. Isn't paying anything, and that's his choice. You condescending? Drummond caught himself, breathing hard. You think you're better than us, coming here with your fancy words and city manners? I think I'm a teacher doing my job. Your job is whatever the hell I say it is. I run the mines. Mines run this town. That means I run you. Eliza stood slowly. She was a foot shorter than Drummond and probably 70 pounds lighter, but she'd been threatened by men before. Her husband had taught her that fear was just another kind of leverage, and leverage only worked if you gave it power. Mr. Drummond, I was hired by the town council to educate children. That's what I'm doing. If you have complaints about my methods, take them up with Mayor Greer. But get out of my schoolhouse, now. He leaned in close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. You're going to regret this. Perhaps, but not tonight. He stared at her, looking for the crack, the weakness. Eliza gave him nothing. Finally, Drummond stepped back. You got a week. Then we'll see how tough you really are. He left. Eliza waited until his footsteps faded completely before sitting down, her legs suddenly weak. A week? 7 days to what, exactly? She had no idea, but she knew threats when she heard them. The Watcher speaks. Caleb waited until full dark before approaching the schoolhouse. He'd watched Drummond enter, watched him leave, and decided that the teacher, Miss Hart, he'd learned her name from Mrs. Chen, had earned herself more trouble than one woman could handle alone, which was her problem, not his. Caleb had learned a long time ago that playing hero got you killed. But he'd also learned that watching good people get broken by bad ones left a taste in your mouth that whiskey couldn't wash away. So he knocked. The door opened a crack. Miss Hart peered out, lamp in hand, face pale but composed. When she saw him, 6 feet of scarred muscle and trail dust, her free hand moved to something below the doorframe. Knife, probably. Or a gun. Smart woman. Can I help you? Her voice was steady. Name's Caleb Rourke. I ranch north of here. I know who you are, Mr. Rourke. The general store owner mentioned you. Said you keep to yourself. Usually. He gestured to the schoolhouse. Saw Drummond visit. Figured I'd check you survived. As you can see, I'm fine. You're alive. That's not the same as fine. She studied him with eyes that saw too much. What do you want, Mr. Rourke? To give you some advice, if you'll take it. I doubt I will, but proceed. Despite himself, Caleb almost smiled. Drummond's not a man who forgets. You embarrassed his son, then stood up to him. He'll come back. I assumed as much. When he does, it won't be a conversation. Are you trying to frighten me? I'm trying to help you understand what you're dealing with. This isn't some city where there are laws and consequences. Out here, men like Drummond are the law. Miss Hart's grip on the lamp tightened. Then what would you suggest I do, Mr. Rourke? Leave? Run? Abandon these children because their fathers are bullies? I'd suggest you think real careful about whether teaching grammar is worth dying for. I've thought about it. She met his gaze without flinching. I stayed. They stood in silence, the lamp casting shadows that turned the schoolhouse doorway into a threshold between worlds. Caleb noticed things he'd missed through the rifle scope, the intelligence in her eyes, the set of her jaw, the way she held herself like someone who'd already survived worse than Roy Drummond could imagine. Your funeral, he said finally. If it comes to that, I'll be sure to save you a seat. She started to close the door, then paused. Mr. Rourke, why did you really come here? Told you. Wanted to make sure you were alive. No, you wanted to warn me away, which means you think I might actually succeed. Otherwise, you wouldn't care. Her head tilted slightly. So, thank you for that. For thinking I might matter. Before Caleb could respond, she closed the door. He stood there for a moment, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. The uncomfortable weight of giving a damn. Then he walked back to his horse and rode north, telling himself he'd done his part. Her choices were her own now. He almost believed it. Tommy didn't return on Tuesday or Wednesday, but 6 other children showed up, drawn by curiosity and the fact that Miss Hart hadn't fled like Margaret Colby. They were a ragged bunch, dirty, underfed, some bearing bruises they wouldn't explain. Eliza taught them anyway. She taught them to read using the only book she had, her grandmother's Bible, a water-damaged copy of Robinson Crusoe, and her own journal, which she let them pass around like treasure. She taught them arithmetic using rocks and sticks, converting the schoolhouse floor into a giant abacus. When they struggled with letters, she had them trace words in the dirt outside, and slowly, grudgingly, they learned. Sarah Watts could read simple sentences by Thursday. The red-haired brothers, Daniel and James, stopped fighting long enough to solve division problems. A new girl, Maria, whose parents ran the town's single restaurant, showed a gift for numbers that made Eliza's heart ache with possibility. For 6 days, Eliza thought maybe she'd won. Then Saturday night arrived, and with it, the men with torches. She smelled smoke first. Eliza woke in her room above the general store, heart already racing, instinct screaming danger before her mind fully processed what was happening. She scrambled to the window. The schoolhouse was burning. Not the whole building, not yet. But flames licked up one wall, fed by whatever accelerant the men had used, and in the firelight she could see them, 5 shapes, faces hidden by bandanas, standing back to watch their work. Eliza didn't think. She grabbed her shawl, ran downstairs and out into the street in her nightgown and bare feet. "Fire!" Her voice ripped through the night. "Fire at the schoolhouse!" Windows lit up along the street. Doors opened, but nobody came out. Nobody helped. Eliza ran for the schoolhouse, gravel cutting her feet, her breath coming in gasps. The heat hit her 10 yards away, fierce and immediate. The men turned to watch her approach. One of them laughed. She didn't care. The building was wood, old dry wood that would burn fast. Inside were the desks she'd repaired, the books she'd salvaged, the slates and chalk, and everything she'd spent 2 weeks building. Inside was her chance to matter. Eliza grabbed the door handle. The metal was already hot enough to burn, but she yanked it open anyway, smoke billowing out in a black wave that sent her stumbling back, coughing. A hand caught her arm. She spun, expecting one of the arsonists, but it was Mrs. Chen, dressed in a nightgown and coat, carrying 2 buckets of water. "The pump," she gasped, shoving the buckets at Eliza. "Form a line. Hurry." They worked alone for the first minute, Eliza throwing water on the flames, Mrs. Chen running back for more. Then Mr. Chen appeared with more buckets. Then one of the miners, then another. Within 5 minutes, a dozen people were hauling water, passing buckets, fighting the fire with desperate efficiency. The men with torches melted into the darkness. By dawn, the schoolhouse stood, barely. One wall was charred black, part of the roof had collapsed, and the smell of smoke had soaked into everything that remained. But the structure itself survived. Eliza sat on the steps as the sun rose, her hands blistered, her feet bleeding, her nightgown ruined with soot and ash. Mrs. Chen sat beside her, silent. "Thank you," Eliza said finally. "Don't thank me. I acted in self-interest." "How so?" "Town burned schoolhouse, next they burned the Chinese shop." Mrs. Chen's voice was flat. "Hate spreads, always spreads." Eliza looked at the scorched building. "I should leave. Probably. But I'm not going to." "I know." Mrs. Chen stood, wincing. She was older than Eliza had realized, maybe 60, with hands twisted from arthritis and a lifetime of hard work. "Margaret Colby said the same thing, week before they burned her house." The words hit like a fist. "They killed her?" "Might as well have. Burned everything she owned. When she tried to fight it, Drummond's men beat her so badly she couldn't stand. Greer paid for her stagecoach ticket, called it charity." Mrs. Chen's eyes were hard. "She left crying, broken. That's what they want to do to you. Then they're going to be disappointed." "Maybe. Or maybe you're just stubborn enough to get yourself killed." Mrs. Chen started walking back toward the store, then paused. "Either way, Miss Hart, you should know, they're not going to stop. Not until you're gone or dead. That's how Red Ridge works." Eliza watched her go. Then she stood, her body screaming protest, and limped into the schoolhouse. The damage was worse inside.
This
Water
story
had
was
ruined most
posted
of
on the
papers.
channel west of
The
the
stove
trail.
had collapsed.
Please do not
3
repost
desks
it in
were
any
charred
form.
beyond repair. But her books had survived, protected by the tin box she'd stored them in. And scrawled on the one clean wall in chalk were words someone had written during the chaos. "We don't need you." Eliza stared at those words for a long time. Then she picked up an eraser and wiped them away. Beneath the hatred, the wood was clean. She could work with that. Monday morning, Eliza opened the schoolhouse doors at 8 o'clock sharp. 12 children showed up. They came hesitant, scared, some of them crying because they'd heard about the fire and thought school was over. Eliza met them at the door, her hands bandaged, her dress borrowed from Mrs. Chen because all of hers reeked of smoke. "Good morning," she said. "Welcome back." Sarah Watts looked at the burned wall, the collapsed roof section, the missing desks. "Miss Hart, are we really having school?" "We are." "But everything's broken." "Not everything. We still have each other. We still have our minds." Eliza gestured inside. "And we still have work to do." They filed in slowly, choosing seats among the salvaged desks. Eliza stood at the front of the room, looking at their faces, dirty, frightened, hopeful despite everything. "Some people in this town," she began quietly, "don't want you to be educated. They think knowledge is dangerous, that learning will give you ideas, make you question, make you want more than they think you deserve." The children stared. Those people are right. Knowledge is dangerous. Questions are powerful. And wanting more, wanting better, that's the most revolutionary act of all. She picked up a piece of chalk. "So here's what we're going to do. We're going to learn anyway. We're going to read and write and calculate until you can't be cheated or lied to. Until you can read a contract before you sign it. Until you know your rights and can demand them." She wrote on the board, "Knowledge is power." This might get harder before it gets easier. Some of your parents might pull you out. The town might try to close us down. But as long as even one of you shows up, I'll be here teaching. That's my promise to you." Tommy Drummond's voice came from the doorway. "You're crazy." Everyone turned. Tommy stood there, no coat despite the cold, looking like he'd walked straight from his house without permission. His face was bruised, fresh, from this morning probably. Eliza kept her voice gentle. "Welcome back, Mr. Drummond. Did you bring the 25 cents? "No." "Then you'll work it off after class." "I ain't working. I came to say you're crazy for staying. My pa's going to—" He stopped, something like fear flickering across his face. "Going to what, Tommy?" He looked at her with eyes too old for 13. "You should leave, Miss Hart, before it's too late." "Is that what you want, or what your father wants?" Tommy's jaw worked. His hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Eliza thought he might cry. Then he walked to a desk and sat down. "Teach," he said roughly. "Just teach." So she did. From his ridge, Caleb watched the schoolhouse through the day, watched children arrive and leave, watched Miss Hart move through the burned building like nothing had changed, watched the town's attention focus on her with an intensity that made his instincts scream warning. He'd stayed away after their conversation, telling himself it wasn't his problem, but he couldn't stop watching. Couldn't stop noticing how she walked home each evening with her head high, how she ignored the whispers and stares, how she kept teaching despite everything Redridge threw at her. Margaret Colby had been brave too, right up until they broke her. Caleb cleaned his rifle that night, checked his ammunition, and told himself he still wasn't getting involved. But he rode into town the next morning anyway, for supplies he didn't need, just to make sure she was still alive. She was. Teaching verbs to children in a half-burned schoolhouse, looking like some kind of frontier saint, too stubborn to know when she was beaten. Caleb bought coffee from Mrs. Chen and asked, casual-like, "She gonna make it?" Mrs. Chen measured beans with arthritic hands. "You asking if she'll survive or if she'll win? Is there a difference?" "Always." She poured the beans into a bag. "Margaret survived, lived another 10 years back east, but Redridge won. They got what they wanted. She left." "And Miss Hart? That one?" Mrs. Chen tied off the bag. "She won't leave. which means one of two things happens. Red Ridge breaks, or she does. She handed him the coffee. You want to know which? Stop watching and start helping. Caleb paid and left without responding. But that night he rode the perimeter of town, checking sight lines, noting which buildings had clear shots to the schoolhouse, where men could hide if they came back. Still not getting involved, he told himself, just being prepared. The letter arrived Thursday, slid under the schoolhouse door sometime before dawn. Eliza found it when she arrived to prepare for the day. No envelope, just a single sheet of paper with words written in careful block letters. Leave by Sunday, or we finish what the fire started. She read it twice, then folded it and put it in her pocket. That day, she taught fractions. Friday, she taught geography, using a map drawn on scrap paper to show the children where Red Ridge fit in the vast expanse of territory. Saturday, she held a special session for the older students, teaching them contract law, how to read fine print, spot predatory terms, protect themselves. Tommy Drummond attended all 3 days. So did Sarah Watts, the Chen's granddaughter May, and 15 other children whose parents either supported education or didn't care enough to intervene. Sunday, Eliza went to church. She wore her best remaining dress, dark gray, properly somber, and sat in the back pew while Reverend Peters delivered a sermon about pride and knowing one's place. The message wasn't subtle. Neither was the way Greer, Drummond, and Hatch sat in the front row, occasionally turning to look at her. After the service, as the congregation filed out, Greer stopped beside her pew. Still here, Miss Hart? As you can see. Foolish. He shook his head, almost sadly. We tried to be reasonable. Tried to give you a chance to leave with your dignity intact. I don't want your version of dignity, Mayor Greer. Then you'll get our version of justice. He leaned close. You've got until sunset. After that, we can't be responsible for what happens. Eliza stood, matching his gaze. I'm not leaving. Your funeral. So I've been told. She walked out of the church with her head high, feeling every eye on her back, and went to the schoolhouse to prepare her lesson plans for Monday. If she lived that long, sunset came at 7:14. Eliza sat in the schoolhouse with all the lamps lit, making herself visible through the windows. She'd considered hiding, running, even asking for help, but she'd made her stand, and running now would invalidate everything she'd told those children about courage and conviction. So she sat and waited. The first men appeared at 8. There were more this time, maybe a dozen, moving through the darkness with purpose. Eliza recognized Hatch by his thin silhouette, Drummond by his bulk. The others were miners, shop owners, men who'd decided that one widowed teacher was too great a threat to their carefully maintained order. They spread out, surrounding the schoolhouse. Eliza set down her pen and stood. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was clear. She'd prepared for this. Behind her desk, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, was the Derringer she'd bought from a passing trader. 2 shots, barely enough to wound, but better than nothing. She was reaching for it when glass shattered. Not from a rock this time, from a bullet. The shot punched through the window above her head, so close she felt the wind of its passing, and buried itself in the far wall. Eliza dropped, her heart hammering, her training kicking in. Stay low, move, don't present a target. Another shot, then another. Methodical. Not trying to kill yet, trying to terrorize. It was working. Eliza crawled toward the back door, splinters digging into her palms, her breath coming in gasps. She could hear them now, shouting to each other, laughing. This was sport to them, entertainment. She reached the door and eased it open. A man stood in the alley. Not one of the shooters. This one was positioned to catch her if she ran. He saw her and smiled. Evening, Miss Hart. Eliza reversed direction, scrambling back inside as footsteps thundered across the porch. They were coming. No more games, no more warnings. They were coming to finish it. She grabbed the Derringer, her hand slippery with sweat, and pointed it at the door. It burst open. Hatch entered first, followed by 2 miners. They stopped when they saw the gun. Well now, Hatch drawled. Looks like the teacher's got teeth. Leave, Eliza said. Her voice didn't shake. Small victories. Leave now and I won't shoot. That little thing? You'd be lucky to hit the wall. Try me. Hatch considered, then smiled his yellow smile. See, here's the problem, Miss Hart. You shoot me, my friends here will tear you apart. You don't shoot me, we'll do it anyway. Either way, you lose.
This story was posted
Maybe,
on the channel west
but you'll
of
still be
Betrayal.
dead.
Please do not
Fair point.
repost it in any
He
form.
took a step forward. But I don't think you got the stomach for killing. Not really. You're a teacher. You save people. You don't destroy them. Another step. Eliza aimed for his chest, her finger tightening on the trigger. The rifle shot came from outside, sharp and clear in the night air. Everyone froze. Hatch turned toward the window. What the hell? Another shot. This one kicked dirt up 3 feet from where Drummond stood in the street, close enough to send him diving for cover. A voice carried through the darkness, cold and absolutely certain. Next one's not a warning. Eliza knew that voice. She'd heard it once, offering advice she'd refused. Caleb Rourke had stopped watching. He'd started acting. The silence after that second shot stretched like wire pulled too tight. Hatch stood frozen in the schoolhouse doorway, his hand halfway to his gun, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the window. Outside, Drummond stayed flattened against the wall of the general store, breathing hard. Eliza didn't lower the Derringer. Her arms ached from holding it steady, but she kept it trained on Hatch's chest, her fingers still resting on the trigger. "That's Rourke," one of the miners whispered, his voice tight with something between fear and respect. "I know who the hell it is." Hatch's jaw worked. He took a step back from the doorway, putting himself against the wall where the angle made him harder to target. "Rourke, this ain't your business." The response came from a different position than before. The man had moved, which meant he knew what he was doing. "Leaving now would make it not my business. We got a right to handle town matters our own way, and I got a right to shoot anyone threatening a woman on her own property." A pause. "Clock's ticking, Hatch. My trigger finger's getting tired." Drummond's voice carried from the street, thick with rage. "You're making a mistake, Rourke. This doesn't concern you." "Told you already. Leave, and it won't." Hatch looked at Eliza, then at the darkness outside, calculating. She could see him weighing options: rush her and risk Rourke's bullet, retreat and look weak, or try to wait out a man who'd clearly positioned himself for a siege. "This isn't over," Hatch said finally. He gestured to the miners. "Let's go." Like hell. Drummond appeared in the doorway, his face purple with fury. "We came to finish this. And we will. Just not tonight." Hatch grabbed Drummond's arm. "Come on." "That bastard doesn't scare me." "Then you're stupider than I thought." Hatch pulled harder. "He's killed 16 men that we know about. You want to be 17 over a goddamn school teacher?" Drummond jerked free but didn't advance. He pointed at Eliza instead. "You think he'll always be there to protect you? Think he'll watch you every night?" Eliza's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I think you should listen to Mr. Hatch and leave while you still can." For a moment, it could have exploded. Then Drummond spat on the floor and stormed out. Hatch followed, and the miners after him, moving quickly now, eager to be gone. Eliza stayed where she was, gun raised, until their footsteps faded completely. Then she sank into the nearest chair, the Derringer suddenly weighing 1,000 pounds. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe 20. She'd lost track of time somewhere between the first bullet and now. The knock on the door made her jump. "It's Rourke! They're gone!" Eliza set down the gun and stood on legs that felt disconnected from her body. She opened the door. Caleb Rourke looked exactly like she remembered. Tall, hard-edged, with eyes that had seen too much and decided to stop being surprised by any of it. He held his rifle loose in one hand, barrel pointed at the ground, completely relaxed, despite having just threatened to kill a dozen men. "You hurt?" he asked. "No." "You sure? You're shaking." "That's just adrenaline." Eliza wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop the tremors. "It'll pass." He studied her for a long moment. "Can I come in?" She stepped aside. He entered, moving with the careful awareness of someone who'd spent years in places where inattention got you killed. His gaze swept the schoolhouse, cataloging the damage. Bullet holes in the walls, shattered windows, overturned desks. "You were going to shoot Hatch," he said. "If I had to." "Would you have?" Eliza met his eyes. "Yes." He nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. "Good." Hesitation gets you killed. I know. She did know. She did. Her husband had hesitated once, in an argument with a man over a card game, and the man had put a bottle through his skull. Jonathan had survived the blow, but not the infection that followed. She'd watched him die over 3 weeks, and she'd learned that sometimes violence was the only language certain men understood. Caleb walked to the window, looked out at the empty street. They'll be back. I know that too. Not tonight. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon. He turned to face her. And next time, I might not be here. I didn't ask you to be here this time. No, you didn't. Something that might have been a smile touched his mouth. Probably should have, though. Despite everything, Eliza laughed. It came out sharp and slightly hysterical, but it was real. You're right. Thank you, Mr. Rourke, for intervening. Caleb. What? My name's Caleb. We're past the point of formalities. She considered that. Eliza. Eliza. He said it carefully, like he was testing how it felt. You got any coffee in this place? I have tea. That'll do. They sat at her desk while the tea steeped, an odd quiet settling over the schoolhouse. Outside, Red Ridge had gone silent. No voices, no movement, like the whole town was holding its breath. How many men have you killed? Eliza asked suddenly. Caleb didn't flinch at the question. Depends on who's counting. Army says 14. Other people say more. And the real number? Does it matter? I suppose not. She poured tea into 2 chipped cups. Were they all justified? According to who? The law? My conscience? He took the cup she offered. I killed men who were trying to kill me or people I was protecting. If that's justified, then yeah. All of them. Eliza sipped her tea, letting the heat center her. The Army. You were a soldier. Scout. Different thing. He stared into his cup. Spent 5 years tracking hostiles through territory most white men couldn't find with a map and a guide. Got good at it. Too good, maybe. What happened? Got shot. He said it flatly, like discussing the weather. Took a bullet meant for an officer I was escorting. Shattered my shoulder, nearly killed me. Army gave me a medal and a discharge. Told me I'd done my duty. But you didn't feel like you had. He looked at her sharply. What makes you say that? Because you're here, alone, watching a town full of people you don't particularly like. Eliza set down her cup. That's not the behavior of a man at peace with his choices. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. You read people pretty well for a school teacher. I was married for 3 years to a man who drank too much and gambled worse. Reading people became survival. He hit you? Sometimes, when the drink made him brave and the gambling made him angry. She met Caleb's gaze without shame. I learned to see it coming, learned to be somewhere else when it did. But you stayed. For a while. Then cholera made the choice for me. Eliza picked up her cup again, needing something to do with her hands. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you so you understand. I know what violence looks like. I know what happens to women who don't have the strength to stand against it. That's why I can't leave. Even if staying gets you killed? Even then. She smiled, but there was nothing happy in it. These children deserve better than Red Ridge wants to give them. Someone has to show them that education matters, that thinking matters, that they don't have to accept the life this town has planned for them. Caleb drank his tea, considering. Margaret Colby thought the same thing. I'm not Margaret Colby. No. He set down his cup. You're more stubborn and probably crazier. I'll take that as a compliment. It wasn't meant as one. He stood, walking to the broken window. But it's true anyway. Question is, what are you going to do about Drummond and his friends? They won't stop. Tonight was a warning. Next time will be the real thing. Eliza had been thinking about that. I need evidence. Of what? Of what they're really doing. Why they want me gone so badly. She stood, joining him at the window. It's not just about education. The hatred is too intense, too coordinated. There's something else driving this. You think they're hiding something. I think this town is built on secrets, and I think I'm getting too close to one that matters. She turned to face him. Will you help me find out what it is? Caleb looked at her like she'd suggested they rob a bank. You're asking me to investigate the town's leading citizens? Yes.
This
The same
story was
citizens who
posted
just
on the
tried to
channel
kill you.
west of Betrayal.
Yes.
Please do not repost
And you think
it
this
in
is a
any
reasonable
form.
request? I think it's necessary. Eliza crossed her arms. You said it yourself. They'll be back. I can keep teaching, keep fighting, but unless I understand what I'm really fighting against, I'm just delaying the inevitable. Caleb rubbed his jaw, the rasp of stubble loud in the quiet. This is a bad idea. Most good ideas start that way. That's not how it works. Then how does it work, Caleb? She used his name deliberately. Do I wait for them to burn the school again? Wait for them to do to me what they did to Margaret? Or do I fight back with the only weapon I have? Information. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he sighed, the sound of a man recognizing a lost cause. What do you want me to do? Relief flooded through her. Start with the land records. Find out who owns what in this town. Follow the money. And you? I'll keep teaching, keep being visible, keep them focused on me while you dig. She smiled slightly. I'm good at being a distraction. Yeah. Caleb picked up his rifle. I noticed. He left through the back door, melting into the darkness like he'd never been there. Eliza watched him go, then turned to survey her schoolhouse. The damage was extensive but repairable, like everything else in her life lately. She started cleaning up, putting desks back in rows, sweeping broken glass, preparing for Monday's lessons. Because that's what you did when the world tried to break you. You got up, cleaned the mess, and kept going. It was the only choice that mattered. The next morning, 17 children showed up for school. Eliza counted them twice, certain she'd made a mistake. But no, 17 students, including 3 she'd never seen before. They filed in quietly, taking seats among the repaired desks, eyes wide as they looked at the bullet holes in the walls. Sarah Watts raised her hand. Miss Hart, are those from last night? They are. Were you scared? Eliza considered lying, then decided against it. Terrified. The honesty seemed to settle something in the room. The children relaxed slightly, reassured perhaps by the knowledge that their teacher was human after all. Tommy Drummond sat in the back row, his face carefully blank. He'd shown up with a black eye and split lip, fresh injuries that made Eliza's stomach turn. But when she'd asked if he was all right, he'd just shrugged and said he'd fallen. They both knew it was a lie. Today, Eliza began, we're going to talk about courage. She taught them about people who'd stood up when standing up was dangerous, about Frederick Douglass, who'd taught himself to read despite laws forbidding it, about Harriet Tubman, who'd risked death to lead others to freedom, about ordinary people who'd made extraordinary choices because someone had to. Courage, she said, isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing what's right anyway. Maria, the restaurant owner's daughter, raised her hand. Like you did last night? Like all of us do every day when we choose to keep learning despite people who want us to stop. After class, Tommy lingered. He waited until the other students had left, then approached her desk. My pa says you're going to get yourself killed. Eliza looked up from the papers she was grading. Your father may be right. Then why do you stay? Because running away teaches you nothing, Tommy. And I'm a teacher. Teaching is what I do. He picked at a splinter on her desk. He hit me because I came here. I know. He said if I come back, he'll do worse. Eliza set down her pen. What do you want to do? Tommy's jaw worked. I want to learn. I want to be able to read something besides my own name. I want... His voice cracked. I don't want to be like him. Then don't be. It ain't that simple. Isn't. And yes, it is. She stood, moving to the window. Your father is who he is because of choices he made. You get to make different choices. That's what education gives you, the ability to choose. And if he beats me for it? Eliza turned to face him. Then you'll heal and come back. That's what courage looks like, Tommy. Not the absence of consequences, but the willingness to face them for something that matters. He nodded slowly, not quite convinced, but not quite ready to give up either. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. He left. Eliza watched him go, then returned to her grading. She didn't notice the woman watching from across the street, half hidden behind the general store. Didn't see her slip away when Caleb Rourke rode past on his way to the county courthouse 20 miles north. But Mrs. Chen saw, and she filed the information away, the way she'd been filing information for 30 years in a town that thought Chinese people didn't pay attention. Caleb reached the courthouse by mid-afternoon. It was a squat stone building that served 3 counties, presided over by a clerk named Jessup, who looked like he'd been carved from the same rock as the walls. "Help you?" Jessup didn't look up from his ledger. "Need to see land records, Red Ridge area." "That'll cost you." Caleb put $2 on the counter. "How much does that buy?" Jessup pocketed the money. "Hour. Don't make a mess." The records room was cramped and smelled like mildew and mouse droppings. Caleb spread out maps and deed books, tracing property lines with his finger, cross-referencing names against transactions. Red Ridge had been founded 15 years ago when prospectors found silver in the hills. The initial claims were small, individual miners working their stakes, but over time those claims had been consolidated, bought up, transferred, absorbed into larger holdings. 3 names appeared over and over: Martin Greer, Silas Hatch, Roy Drummond. That wasn't surprising. What was surprising was the pattern. Every transfer, every sale, every consolidation happened shortly after the previous owner encountered some kind of trouble: a mine collapse, a house fire, a mysterious illness. The dates were too consistent to be coincidence. Caleb pulled another ledger, this one tracking mining claims. Red Ridge sat on top of a silver vein that ran for miles, but only certain sections were being actively worked. The rest were listed as exhausted or non-productive. Except the geological survey from 3 years ago, buried in a file Jessup probably didn't even know existed, said otherwise. According to the survey, the richest section of the vein ran directly under property that had been owned by someone named Hart, Eliza's husband. Caleb sat back, pieces clicking into place. Jonathan Hart had owned the richest silver land in the region. Then he died. "Cholera," Eliza said. But cholera didn't explain why his property had been seized for unpaid debts and sold at auction for a fraction of its value. Sold to Martin Greer, who'd immediately transferred it to a shell company that listed Drummond and Hatch as silent partners. They'd stolen it, stolen the land, probably killed her husband to do it, and now they were mining silver worth a fortune while Eliza lived in a room above a general store, teaching children for barely enough to survive. And she had no idea. Caleb copied the relevant information, paid Jessup another $1 for his trouble, and rode back to Red Ridge as the sun set. He found Eliza in the schoolhouse, still grading papers by lamplight. "You need to sit down," he said without preamble. She looked up, startled. "What's wrong?" "Everything." He pulled out the notes he'd made. "Your husband didn't just own land in Red Ridge. He owned the most valuable mining claim in the territory." Eliza blinked. "That's impossible. Jonathan was a gambler and a drunk. He didn't own anything worth—" "He won it in a card game 5 years ago in Denver. Some prospector got drunk, bet his claim, and lost." Caleb spread out the papers. "Jonathan never worked it. Maybe he didn't know what he had. Maybe he just forgot. But the claim was legal, recorded, his name in the ledger." "Then how—" "He died. The claim went to you as his widow. But before you could inherit, Greer declared the estate in debt. Unpaid taxes, gambling debts, whatever he could manufacture. He seized the property, sold it at auction, an auction nobody else knew about, and bought it himself for nothing." Eliza stared at the papers. "They stole it." "Yeah. And now they're mining silver on land that should be mine." "Yeah." She stood, walked to the window, her hands shaking. Not from fear this time, from rage. "How much is it worth?" "The vein?" Geologists estimated maybe $2 million. Probably more now that they've been working it. $2 million. The number was so large it didn't feel real. Eliza had been teaching for scraps while 3 men got rich off property that belonged to her. "That's why they want me gone," she said quietly. "Not because I'm teaching children to think. Because if I start asking questions about Jonathan's estate, about what happened to his property, the whole scheme falls apart." Caleb joined her at the window. "They can't have you digging into the past. Easier to run you off or kill you. Like they killed Jonathan. We don't know that for sure. Don't we?" She turned to face him. Jonathan died in Red Ridge. He came here 2 weeks before the end, said he had business to settle. He never told me what kind. Then he got sick, died within days, and was buried before I could even arrive for the funeral.
This story was
Her voice
posted on the
hardened.
channel west
That's
of
not
betrayal.
cholera. That's
Please
poison.
do not repost it in
Caleb
any
couldn't
form.
argue. The timeline fit. You want to go to the authorities? With what proof? Suspicions? A geological survey they'll claim is outdated? She shook her head. They own this town, Caleb. The sheriff works for Drummond. The mayor is Greer. Going official means giving them warning. Then what do you want to do? Eliza was quiet for a long moment, thinking. I want to make them show their hand. Force them into a mistake. How? I'm going to file a claim, publicly, demand an investigation into my husband's estate. She met his eyes. Either the territorial governor will intervene, or they'll have to silence me permanently. Either way, the truth comes out. That's suicide. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only way to win. She smiled grimly. You said it yourself, hesitation gets you killed. I'm done hesitating. Caleb recognized that look. He'd seen it on soldiers who'd decided death was preferable to retreat. You're really going to do this? I am, and I need you to do something for me. What? If they kill me, I need you to make sure the claim still goes forward. Get the papers to the governor. Tell my story. She pulled an envelope from her desk. I've written everything down. Names, dates, suspicions. It's not proof, but it's a start. He took the envelope, feeling its weight. You're giving me your life insurance. I'm giving you my legacy. There's a difference. They stood in the lamplight, two people who'd stumbled into something bigger than either of them had intended. Outside, Red Ridge slept, unaware that the war they'd been waging quietly was about to go public. When? Caleb asked. Tomorrow. I'll ride to the county seat, file the papers myself. She turned away from the window. You should keep your distance after that. No reason for both of us to be targets. Yeah, that's not happening. Caleb, I said no. His voice was flat, final. You want to pick a fight with half the town? Fine. But you're not doing it alone. This isn't your battle. It is now. He picked up his rifle. I'll watch the road tomorrow. Make sure you get to the courthouse and back. Why are you doing this? He paused at the door. Because someone should have done it for Margaret Colby. Because this town needs to learn that terror doesn't work forever. He looked back at her. And because you're right, some things are worth dying for. He left before she could respond. Eliza stood alone in the schoolhouse, holding the future in her hands, and wondered if courage and stupidity were really different things or just different names for the same impulse. Then she blew out the lamp and went to prepare for war. The next morning broke cold and clear. Eliza dressed in her traveling clothes, the dark blue dress she'd worn for Jonathan's funeral, sensible boots, a coat that had seen better days. She packed the claim papers in a leather satchel, along with Jonathan's wedding ring and a letter she'd written for the children, just in case. Mrs. Chen was waiting downstairs with coffee and bread. You're leaving. It wasn't a question. Just for the day. I have business at the county seat. Business that might get you killed. Eliza accepted the coffee. How much do you know? Enough? Mrs. Chen set down the bread. Chinese people hear things, see things. White folks forget we exist, so they talk around us like we're furniture. She poured her own coffee. I know Greer cheated your husband. No Drummond poisoned him. No Hatch paid the doctor to lie about the cause of death. The casual confirmation of murder made Eliza's breath catch. Why didn't you tell anyone? Who would listen? I'm Chinese, foreign. My word means nothing against theirs. Mrs. Chen's eyes were hard. But yours might, if you live long enough to use it. I'm trying. Try harder. She pushed the bread across the table. Eat. You'll need your strength. They sat in silence, two women who'd learned that survival meant keeping your head down and your mouth shut, contemplating what happened when you did the opposite. Thank you, Eliza said finally, for everything. Mrs. Chen nodded. Don't die. Bad for business. It was the closest thing to affection Eliza had received in Red Ridge, and she took it for what it was worth. Caleb was waiting outside with 2 horses. He'd saddled them both, loaded supplies, and positioned himself where he could see the entire street. Ready? He asked. as I'll ever be. They rode out as the sun cleared the horizon, and if anyone in Red Ridge noticed, they kept it to themselves. The road to the county seat stretched 23 miles through territory that looked peaceful until you knew better. Caleb kept his rifle across his saddle, eyes scanning the ridgeline, the scattered rocks, the stands of pine where men could hide and wait. Eliza rode beside him, her posture straight despite the hours in the saddle. She'd been quiet since they left Red Ridge, lost in thoughts she didn't share. Caleb let her have the silence. People facing their own mortality deserved space to think. They were 12 miles out when he saw the dust. "Riders," he said quietly. "Behind us. Maybe 3 miles back." Eliza glanced over her shoulder but couldn't see what he saw. "How many?" "Can't tell yet, but they're coming fast." "Could be coincidence." "You believe that?" She faced forward again. "No." Caleb urged his horse into a faster pace. Not a gallop that would tire the animals too quickly, but a steady lope that ate up ground. Eliza matched him without complaint, and he noticed she rode well, comfortable in the saddle despite her schoolteacher appearance. The dust behind them grew closer. "4 riders," Caleb said after another mile, pushing hard. "Can we outrun them?" "Not to the county seat, too far." He looked around, calculating. A quarter mile ahead, the road cut through a narrow pass with rock walls on both sides. Defensible, if it came to that. "How good are you with that Derringer?" "I hit what I aim at, usually. Usually's not good enough today." He pulled his revolver from his belt and handed it to her. 6 shots. Don't waste them." Eliza took the gun, feeling its weight. "What will you use?" "The rifle, and if we're lucky, nothing at all." He pointed to the pass. "We're going to stop there. High ground on both sides. If they want to talk, we talk. If they want trouble, we make them regret it." They reached the pass with maybe 2 minutes to spare. Caleb dismounted, pulled his rifle, and moved to a position behind a boulder that gave him clear sight lines in both directions. Eliza stayed with the horses, the revolver held in both hands the way her husband had taught her years ago. The riders appeared around the bend. 4 men, just like Caleb had said. They slowed when they saw Eliza and Caleb waiting, spread out across the road in a formation that said they'd done this before. No bandanas covering their faces this time. They weren't hiding. The lead rider was someone Eliza recognized, Jake Morrison, who worked as Drummond's foreman at the mine. The others were miners, hard men with harder eyes. Morrison raised a hand, signaling a stop. "Miss Hart, didn't expect to see you out riding today." "Mr. Morrison, I could say the same about you and your friends. We're just heading to the county seat. Business." "Same business that requires you to follow us at a gallop?" Morrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Now what makes you think we were following you?" "The fact that you're here." Eliza kept the gun pointed at the ground, but her finger was on the trigger. "State your business or move along." "Mr. Drummond wants to talk. Sent us to escort you back to Red Ridge." "I'm not interested in conversation with Mr. Drummond." "Wasn't a request, ma'am." Caleb's voice cut across the pass, cold and flat. "She said no. Time for you boys to turn around." Morrison finally looked at him, really looked, and something flickered across his face. Fear, maybe. Or the memory of stories about the man with the rifle. "This doesn't concern you, Rourke." "Seems like it does." "You're making a mistake." "Wouldn't be my first." Caleb's finger moved to the trigger. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn those horses around and ride back to Red Ridge. Tell Drummond that Miss Hart will speak with him when she's ready. On her terms, not his." "And if we don't?" "Then I start shooting, and you boys find out if those stories about me are true." He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made Morrison's horse shift nervously. "Want to test it?" The miners looked at each other. One of them, younger than the rest, started to reach for his gun. "Don't." Caleb's rifle moved fractionally, centering on the young miner's chest. "You're fast. I'm faster, and I'm already aimed." The young miner froze. Morrison held up a hand. "Easy now. Nobody needs to die today." "Then stop giving me reasons to shoot." For a long moment, the pass was silent, except for the wind and the nervous breathing of horses. Then Morrison pulled on his reins, backing his horse up. "Mr. Drummond's not going to like this." "Mr. Drummond can go to hell," Eliza said quietly. "And you can tell him I said so." Morrison's jaw tightened, but he gestured to his men. They turned their horses and rode back the way they'd come, slower this time, trying to salvage some dignity from the retreat. Caleb waited until they disappeared around the bend before lowering his rifle.
This story was
That
posted
bought
on
us
the
maybe an
channel
hour.
west of
They'll
Betrayal.
circle around,
Please
try
do
to
not
catch us on the
repost
way
it
back.
in any form.
Then we'd better file those papers quickly. They remounted and rode hard for the county seat, arriving just before noon. The courthouse looked the same as when Caleb had visited it days earlier. Stone walls, indifferent clerk, the smell of old paper and older secrets. Jessup looked up when they entered. Back already? Need to file a legal claim, Eliza said, pulling papers from her satchel. Contesting the sale of property belonging to my late husband, Jonathan Hart. Jessup's expression didn't change, but his hand paused over his ledger. That's a serious accusation. It's a legal claim, not an accusation. I have documentation. She spread the papers on the counter. Proof of marriage, my husband's death certificate, the original land claim registered in Denver, and a surveyor's report showing the property's true value. The clerk examined the papers slowly, reading every word. When he finished, he looked up at Eliza with something that might have been respect. You know what this means, filing this claim? I know exactly what it means. There'll be an investigation, territorial marshal, probably a judge. They'll dig into everything, your husband's death, the property transfer, all of it. That's what I'm counting on. Jessup pulled out a stamp and an official form. I'll need you to swear that everything in this claim is true to the best of your knowledge. I swear it. He stamped the papers, made 3 copies, filed 1 in the official record, and handed 2 back to Eliza. Done. The territorial government will be notified within the week. Until then, the property in question is frozen. No transfers, no sales, no mining. Eliza's hand shook slightly as she took the copies. She'd done it, actually done it. Whatever happened now, the truth would come out. Thank you, Mr. Jessup. Don't thank me yet. You just declared war on some powerful men. He closed the ledger. Watch your back, Miss Hart. They left the courthouse and headed for the horses. Caleb was scanning the street, looking for trouble that hadn't arrived yet. We need to move, he said. Morrison will have sent word back by now. Greer's going to know what you did before we're halfway home. Let him know. Eliza mounted her horse, tucking the copies of the claim into her satchel. I'm done hiding. The ride back was tense but uneventful. Morrison and his men didn't reappear, which worried Caleb more than if they had. It meant Greer was planning something bigger, something that required preparation. They reached Red Ridge as the sun started its descent. The town looked normal, people going about their business, children playing in the street, smoke rising from chimneys. But Caleb felt the wrongness in his gut, the stillness before violence. Go to the general store, he told Eliza. Stay with Mrs. Chen. Don't be alone. Where will you be? Watching. He didn't say watching for what. They both knew. Eliza dismounted and headed for the store. Caleb rode to the livery, stabled both horses, and made his way to the saloon. If trouble was brewing, that's where he'd hear about it first. The saloon was crowded for late afternoon. Miners ending their shifts, drifters looking for work, the usual collection of men who measured time in drinks rather than hours. Caleb found a spot at the bar with a clear view of the door and ordered whiskey. The conversation around him was loud, vulgar, normal, but underneath it ran a current of tension. Men kept glancing at him, then away. Whispered words he couldn't quite catch. Something was happening. Hatch appeared from the back room, saw Caleb, and went very still. Rourke didn't expect to see you in here. Seemed like a good day for a drink. That's so. Hatch moved behind the bar, his yellow-stained fingers drumming against the wood. Heard you and Miss Hart took a ride today. News travels fast. Always does in small towns. He poured himself a drink. Also heard she filed some papers. Legal papers. Wouldn't know anything about that. No? Hatch's smile was thin. Funny thing about legal papers. Sometimes they cause all sorts of trouble. Stir up questions better left buried. Caleb sipped his whiskey. Sounds like someone's worried. Just making conversation. Hatch set down his glass. You're a smart man, Rourke. Smart enough to know when to mind your own business. And if I've decided this is my business, then you're not as smart as I thought. Hatch leaned forward. You got a nice ranch, quiet place. Be a shame if something happened to it. The threat was so blatant it was almost funny. Almost. You threatening my property, Hatch? Just stating facts. Accidents happen all the time out here. Fires, thieves. Sometimes a man rides out to his ranch and finds there's nothing left to come home to. Caleb set down his whiskey glass very carefully. Let me state some facts, too. You touch my ranch, I'll burn your saloon to the ground with you inside it. You come after Miss Hart again, I'll make what happened in the past look like a friendly conversation. And if you think I'm bluffing, ask around about what I did to the last men who threatened people I cared about. The saloon had gone quiet. Every man was listening now, waiting to see what happened. Hatch's face went red, then pale. You're making enemies you can't afford. I've had worse enemies than you and Greer and Drummond combined. They're all dead now. Caleb stood, leaving money on the bar. Think about that. He walked out into the fading sunlight, feeling every eye in the saloon on his back. He'd just painted a target on himself the size of the territory, but it was too late to take it back now. War was coming. The only question was when. He got his answer an hour later. Caleb was checking the perimeter of the schoolhouse when he heard the commotion from the main street, shouting, running, the kind of chaos that meant something had gone very wrong. He ran toward the noise, rifle in hand. A crowd had gathered outside the general store. Caleb pushed through, dread building in his chest, and saw Mrs. Chen standing in the doorway, her face ashen. What happened? He demanded. Mrs. Chen pointed upstairs. Eliza, she's gone. The room had been torn apart, furniture overturned, clothes scattered, the mattress shredded. Signs of a struggle, broken lamp, blood on the floor, claw marks on the doorframe where someone had tried to hold on. But no Eliza. Caleb's vision narrowed to a single point of cold fury. When? 20 minutes ago, maybe less. Mrs. Chen's voice shook. I was downstairs, heard fighting, but by the time I got up here, she gestured helplessly at the destruction. Did you see them? 4 men, maybe 5. They had her mouth covered, hands tied, put her in a wagon and drove north. North, toward the mine. Caleb was already moving, his mind calculating distance and time. 20 minutes meant they were miles ahead, but a wagon on rough roads was slower than a man on horseback who didn't care about killing his mount to catch up. Tell the marshal, he said, knowing it was useless. The marshal worked for Drummond. Caleb, Mrs. Chen grabbed his arm. They're going to kill her. I know. You can't go alone. You'll need help. No time. He pulled free. If I'm not back by morning, send word to the territorial marshal. Tell them everything. He ran for the livery, his boots pounding against the dirt, his heart hammering with a fear he hadn't felt since the war. They had Eliza. They'd taken her because of the claim, because she dared to fight back, because in their minds she was property they could dispose of when it became inconvenient. They'd made a mistake thinking he'd let that stand. Caleb saddled his horse in record time, checked his weapons, rifle, 2 pistols, a knife, and rode out of Red Ridge like death was chasing him. Or like he was chasing it. The wagon tracks were easy to follow in the fading light. They headed straight for the mine, just like he'd expected. Drummond's territory. His kingdom, where he made the rules and buried the evidence. Caleb pushed his horse harder than he should have, eating up the miles, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Night would make tracking harder, but also provide cover. He could work with that. 2 miles from the mine, he found where they'd stopped. The wagon sat abandoned beside the road, one wheel broken, supplies scattered in the dirt. Boot prints led away from the wreck, heading uphill toward a cluster of buildings Caleb recognized. The old mine office, abandoned when they'd opened the new shaft deeper in the hills. Perfect place for an ambush. Or a murder. Caleb left his horse tied to a tree and approached on foot, moving through the darkening woods with the silence he'd learned scouting hostile territory. The buildings appeared through the trees, 3 structures, all wood, all dark except for lamplight in the largest one. He could hear voices, angry voices, arguing. Caleb circled to the back of the building, found a window, looked inside. 6 men. Morrison and his crew from the pass, plus 2 others Caleb didn't recognize. They stood in a loose circle around a chair where Eliza sat, her hands tied behind her back, blood running from a cut on her forehead. But she was alive, conscious, glaring at Drummond like she
This
wanted to
story
kill
was
him with her
posted
eyes
on the
alone.
channel west of
Drummond paced in
Betrayal.
front of her.
Please
his
do not
face purple
repost
with
it
rage.
in any form.
You stupid woman. Do you have any idea what you've done? I filed a legal claim for property that belongs to me. Eliza's voice was steady, despite the blood. Something you should have expected after you murdered my husband. The slap echoed through the building. Eliza's head snapped to the side, but she didn't cry out. Caleb's finger tightened on the trigger. Not yet. Wait for the right moment. Jonathan Hart was a drunk and a fool, Drummond snarled. He didn't deserve that land. But you did? By stealing it? By poisoning him? He died of cholera. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows you paid the doctor to lie about it. Eliza turned her head back to face him, and Caleb saw something fierce and unbreakable in her expression. You're going to hang for this, Mr. Drummond. You and Greer and Hatch. The territorial marshal will investigate. They'll find the truth. There won't be an investigation if you're dead. Killing me won't stop it. The claim is filed. The wheels are already turning. Morrison stepped forward. Boss, maybe we should... Shut up. Drummond pulled a pistol from his belt. I'm done talking. This ends tonight. He cocked the hammer. Caleb didn't think, didn't plan. He just moved. The window exploded inward as Caleb crashed through it, glass and wood flying, his rifle already firing. The first shot took Morrison in the chest, dropping him before he could even draw. The second caught one of the unknown men in the shoulder, spinning him around. Chaos erupted. Men shouted, drew weapons, dove for cover. Caleb rolled to his feet using an overturned desk as shelter, working the rifle's lever action with mechanical precision. Another shot. Another man down. Drummond swung his pistol toward Eliza. No! Caleb's shout was raw, desperate. Eliza threw herself sideways, chair and all, hitting the floor hard as Drummond's shot went wide. The chair splintered on impact, and she kicked free of the wreckage, her hands still tied but her legs working fine. Caleb shot Drummond in the gun arm. The man screamed, dropping his pistol, clutching his shattered elbow. The remaining men broke. They ran for the door, scrambling over each other in their panic, leaving their boss bleeding and screaming on the floor. Caleb let them go. He had what he came for. He crossed to Eliza, pulling his knife to cut her bonds. You hurt? I'll live. Her hands came free and she grabbed his arm, steadying herself. Behind you! Caleb spun. Drummond had retrieved his pistol with his left hand, was bringing it up, his face twisted with pain and hate. Eliza moved faster. She grabbed Morrison's fallen pistol from the floor and shot Drummond 3 times in the chest. The mine owner fell backward, hit the wall, and slid down it, leaving a red smear on the wood. His eyes went glassy, fixed on nothing. The silence after the gunshots was absolute. Eliza stood holding the smoking pistol, her whole body shaking, staring at what she'd done. She'd killed a man. Actually killed him. The reality of it crashed over her in waves. Caleb took the gun gently from her hands. It's over. I killed him. He was going to kill you and me. You did what you had to. I killed him. She looked at her hands like they belonged to someone else. I took a life. Eliza. Caleb turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. You survived. That's what matters. You survived. She nodded, not really hearing him, shock setting in. Caleb
This story was
recognized
posted on the channel
He'd
west
seen
of
them enough
Betrayal.
times in the war.
Please do
that
not
moment when
repost
someone
it in any
realizes
form.
they've crossed a line they can't uncross. We need to go, he said gently, before those men come back with reinforcements. Go where? Somewhere safe. Somewhere they can't find you until the marshal arrives. My ranch. The voice came from the doorway. They both spun. A man stood there, old but solid, wearing a badge that caught the lamplight. He held a rifle pointed at the floor, not threatening, just present. Who the hell are you? Caleb demanded. Deputy Marshal James Cartwright, Territorial Office. He looked at the bodies, at Drummond's corpse, at the blood and broken glass. Hell of a mess you've made here. They kidnapped her, tried to kill both of us. I believe you. Cartwright lowered his rifle completely. I've been investigating Red Ridge for 3 months, following money trails, talking to people who were too scared to talk before. When Miss Hart's claim came through this morning, my boss sent me out immediately. He gestured to the carnage. Looks like I'm a little late. Eliza found her voice. You're investigating Greer? Greer Hatch Drummond. The whole operation. He pulled out a notebook. I'll need statements from both of you. Everything you know, everything you can prove. What about the men who ran? Caleb asked. Already got deputies rounding them up. By morning, everyone involved in this will be in custody. Cartwright looked at Eliza. You did good work, ma'am. That claim you filed gave us enough cause to move. Without it, we'd still be gathering evidence while they kept killing people. Eliza sat down heavily on an intact chair. Jonathan, did you know about Jonathan? That he was poisoned? Yes. We exhumed the body 2 weeks ago, ran tests, arsenic in his system, enough to kill a horse. Cartwright's voice softened. I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Hart, and I'm sorry it took us so long to act. You're acting now. That's what matters. They gave their statements there in that blood-soaked room, telling the story from beginning to end while Cartwright took notes and occasionally swore under his breath. When they finished, the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of red that looked too much like the blood still staining the floor. Go home, Cartwright said finally. Both of you. Get some rest. I'll need you to testify when this goes to trial, but that's weeks away. Caleb stood, helping Eliza to her feet. She leaned on him, exhausted beyond words, and they walked out into the dawn together. Red Ridge was quiet when they returned. Word had spread somehow, maybe from the deputies, maybe from the men who'd fled the mine, and people lined the street watching as Caleb and Eliza rode through. No one cheered, no one spoke. They just watched, witnessing the end of the world they'd known. Mrs. Chen was waiting outside the general store. She took one look at Eliza, bloody, exhausted, barely able to stand, and helped her inside without a word. Caleb stayed in the street, facing the town that had let this happen. His gaze found Greer standing outside the saloon, Hatch beside him, both of them wearing expressions caught between fear and defiance. It's over, Caleb called out. The marshal knows everything. You can run or you can wait for them to come get you. Either way, you're done. Greer opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. What could he say? The game was finished. The truth was coming out. Caleb turned his back on them and walked away. He found Eliza upstairs, cleaned up and bandaged, wearing clothes Mrs. Chen had provided. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. You should rest, he said from the doorway. I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see... She didn't finish. Caleb sat beside her, careful not to crowd her. You'll see it for a while. That's how it works. But it gets easier. Not better, exactly. Just easier to carry. Does it? For you? Sometimes. He was quiet for a moment. The first man I killed, I was 19. Hostile raiding party hit our camp and I shot one of them before I even really knew what I was doing. I threw up afterward. Couldn't eat for 2 days. But you kept doing it. Because I had to, just like you did tonight. He looked at her. You're not a killer, Eliza. You're someone who refused to die. There's a difference. She leaned against him, and he let her, solid and present and alive. They sat like that while the sun rose fully, painting Red Ridge in gold light it didn't deserve. What happens now? She asked finally. Now you get what's yours, the land, the mine, everything they stole. The law will make sure of it. And then? Then you decide what kind of person you want to be, what kind of life you want to build. He stood, offering his hand. But first, you rest. Everything else can wait. She took his hand and let him help her to bed. As he turned to leave, she called out, Caleb? Yeah? Thank you for coming for me, for not giving up. He looked back at her, this woman who'd fought an entire town and somehow won. Wasn't giving up, just doing what needed doing. Still, thank you. He nodded and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Outside, Red Ridge was waking up to a new reality. The old order was dying, and something new, something better, maybe, had a chance to take its place. If they were brave enough to build it. Eliza slept through the morning and into the afternoon, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion that went deeper than physical. When she woke, the room was dim with late daylight, and Mrs.
This
Chen
story
sat
was
in the corner
posted on the
chair,
channel
mending a
west
shirt
of
with
Betrayal.
quick, efficient
Please do not
movements.
repost it
How
in
long
any
was
form.
I out? Eliza's voice came out rough. 6 hours, maybe 7. Mrs. Chen didn't look up from her needle. You talked in your sleep, mostly nonsense. Some of it sounded like fighting. Eliza sat up slowly, testing her body. Everything hurt. Her head where they'd struck her, her wrists where the ropes had cut, muscles she didn't know she had. But she was alive, which counted for more than comfort. Where's Caleb? Dealing with the deputies. Answering questions. Mrs. Chen tied off a thread and bit it clean. Half the town's in custody. The other half is pretending they never supported any of it. That was fast. People turn quick when the power shifts. Yesterday, Greer was king. Today, he's in chains waiting for the territorial judge. She set down the mending. You hungry? Eliza's stomach answered before she could. Mrs. Chen smiled slightly and produced a bowl of soup from somewhere, still warm, smelling of ginger and chicken. Eat. Then we talk about what comes next. The soup was good, better than anything Eliza had tasted in weeks. She ate slowly, feeling strength return with each spoonful, while Mrs. Chen watched with the satisfaction of someone who'd successfully fed a stray. The children were asking about you, Mrs. Chen said after Eliza had finished. Want to know if there's still school tomorrow. Is there? That's up to you. The schoolhouse is still standing. The town council, what's left of it, hasn't rescinded your contract. She folded her hands. Question is whether you want to stay in a place that tried to kill you. Eliza thought about that, about Red Ridge and its ugly history, its capacity for cruelty, but also about Sarah Watts learning to read, Tommy Drummond choosing education over his father's hate, 17 children showing up despite threats and fire. The children didn't try to kill me, she said finally. Their parents did. There's a difference. You're staying then. I'm staying. Eliza handed back the empty bowl. At least until the trial. After that, we'll see. Mrs. Chen nodded like she'd expected that answer. The deputy marshal wants to talk to you when you're ready. He's waiting downstairs. Cartwright looked tired when Eliza descended. He sat at one of the store's tables, surrounded by papers and maps, a cup of coffee gone cold at his elbow. When he saw her, he stood. Miss Hart, good to see you on your feet. Deputy Marshal. Eliza took the chair across from him. I assume you have questions? Just a few, mostly about the financial arrangements. He shuffled papers. We've seized Drummond's records from the mine office. The accounting is creative. Money flowing through shell companies, payouts to officials, bribes disguised as investments. He looked up. Your husband's land is worth considerably more than we initially thought. How much more? Current estimate puts the silver reserves at close to $4 million. Maybe more depending on how deep the vein runs. He let that number settle. That makes you one of the wealthiest people in the territory, Miss Hart. Eliza sat very still. 4 million. The number was so large it became abstract, meaningless. She'd been living on $30 a month, teaching in a burned-out schoolhouse, and apparently she was rich beyond anything she could imagine. I don't want it, she heard herself say. Cartwright blinked. I'm sorry? The money, the mine. I don't want it. The words came faster now, fueled by certainty. That wealth was built on murder and theft. On my husband's death,
This
and
story
who knows
was
how many
posted
others.
on the channel
I won't
west of
profit from
Betrayal.
that. Miss
Please
Hart,
do not
with
repost
respect,
it in
it's
any form.
legally yours. The territorial court will confirm your claim. You have every right. Rights don't make things right. Eliza stood, pacing. Jonathan died for that land. Margaret Colby was beaten and driven away. How many miners were cheated out of fair wages? How many families were ruined? She turned to face him. I won't become what they were. I won't build my future on someone else's grave. Cartwright leaned back in his chair. Then what do you want to do with it? Give it back to the town. Put it in a trust that funds real development, schools, hospitals, fair wages for the miners. Make it serve the people instead of a few corrupt men. She crossed her arms. Can that be done legally? It can. But Miss Hart, you should think carefully. I have thought about it. I've been thinking about it since I woke up. Eliza's voice was firm. I came to Red Ridge to teach, not to get rich. That hasn't changed. So the The deputy marshal studied her for a long moment. You're either the most principled person I've ever met, or the craziest. Probably both. He almost smiled. I'll need to consult with the territorial attorney, but yes, a trust can be established. You'll retain ownership technically, but the assets will be managed for the public good. With oversight, of course, to prevent the kind of corruption that got us here in the first place. That's what I want. Then that's what we'll make happen. He gathered his papers. For what it's worth, Miss Hart, your husband would be proud of you. Eliza thought about Jonathan, drunk, violent, careless with everything including his own life. Would he be proud? She doubted it. But maybe that didn't matter. This wasn't about him anymore. Thank you, Deputy Marshal. He tipped his hat and left. Eliza stood alone in the store, feeling the weight of the decision she'd just made, wondering if she'd lost her mind. Mrs. Chen emerged from the back room. You gave away $4 million. I gave away money that wasn't really mine. The law says different. The law isn't always right. Eliza turned to face her. Would you have kept it, knowing where it came from? Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment. No, she admitted. But I'm Chinese in a white man's territory. I can't afford principles that expensive. Maybe that's why someone who can afford them should use them. Maybe. Mrs. Chen walked to the counter, started organizing jars that didn't need organizing. You know people will think you're crazy. Let them. You know some will hate you for it. The miners who wanted the mine to keep running under new ownership. The businessmen who saw profit in your claim. I know. And you're doing it anyway. I'm doing it anyway. Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. Then I suppose you really are as stubborn as you seem. Caleb found Eliza that evening at the schoolhouse. She was sweeping the floor, putting the room back in order after days of chaos, working with the focused intensity of someone trying not to think too hard. Heard about your decision, he said from the doorway. Eliza didn't stop sweeping. And I think you're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Everyone keeps saying that. Because it's true. He came inside, watching her work. $4 million, Eliza. That's not just money. That's power, security, the ability to go anywhere, do anything, never worry about anything again. I know what money is, Caleb. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you just gave away the kind of wealth most people would kill for. Hell, Drummond did kill for it. She stopped sweeping, turned to face him. Is that what you think I should do? Keep it? Use it? I think you should consider what you're throwing away. I did consider it, for about 5 seconds. Then I realized I didn't want to become the next Greer, sitting on a fortune while children starve and families struggle. She gripped the broom handle. The money isn't worth that price. So you're just going to give it to the town? The same town that tried to kill you? I'm giving it to the children, the families, the people who had no part in what Greer and Drummond did. Her voice softened. This place needs help, Caleb. Real help. A trust fund can provide that in ways I never could alone. He shook his head, not in disagreement, but in something like wonder. You really believe that? I have to believe it. Otherwise, what was all this for? She gestured around the schoolhouse, at the bullet holes and burn marks. If I take the money and leave, they win. Redridge stays broken, corrupt, and nothing changes. But if I use what happened to build something better, that means something. Caleb walked to the window, looked out at the darkening street. You're going to have enemies. People who wanted a piece of that fortune. People who think you're a fool for giving it up. I already have enemies. At least these ones won't be trying to murder me. Don't count on it. He turned back to her. Money makes people crazy, Eliza. Even the idea of money. You just told the whole territory that you're choosing principles over profit. Some folks will admire that. Others will want to test it. Then I'll deal with it when it happens. You can't deal with everything alone. I'm not alone. She met his eyes. I have you. Don't I? The question hung in the air between them, carrying weight beyond the words. Caleb looked at this woman who'd turned his careful isolation upside down, who'd made him care despite every instinct telling him not to, and realized he'd already answered that question the night he rode to save her. Yeah, he said quietly. You have me. Something shifted in Eliza's expression, a wall coming down. Good. Because I'm going to need help managing that trust. Someone who knows the territory, knows mining, knows how to spot corruption before it starts. You're asking me to help run a $4 million charitable fund. I'm asking you to help make sure Red Ridge becomes the kind of place worth living in. She set down the broom. Unless you'd rather go back to your ranch and pretend none of this happened. Caleb considered that. His ranch, his isolation, his carefully constructed life where caring about people couldn't get you killed. It sounded empty now, hollow in a way it hadn't been before. I'll think about it, he said, which they both knew meant yes. The trial started 3 weeks later in the county seat with a territorial judge imported from Denver to ensure impartiality. Greer and Hatch sat in chains at the defendant's table, looking smaller than they had in Red Ridge, stripped of the power that had made them dangerous. The miners who'd kidnapped Eliza had already pleaded guilty in exchange for reduced sentences. Morrison had survived his gunshot wound and turned state's evidence, providing testimony that connected Greer directly to Jonathan Hart's murder. Eliza testified on the second day, walking the judge through everything from her arrival in Red Ridge to the night at the mine. The defense attorney tried to shake her story, questioning her memory, her motives, her character. Isn't it true, Miss Hart, that you came to Red Ridge with the specific intention of claiming your husband's estate? No, I came to teach. But you admit you filed a legal claim for property worth millions. After I discovered it had been stolen, yes. Stolen? That's a strong word. Murder is a stronger one. Eliza's voice was level. My husband was poisoned by Roy Drummond on orders from Martin Greer because he owned land they wanted. The territorial marshal confirmed arsenic in Jonathan's remains. That's not an allegation. That's fact. The attorney changed tactics. You killed Roy Drummond. In self-defense, he was going to kill me and Caleb Rourke. I did what I had to. Convenient that the main witness to your version of events is also the man you're romantically involved with. Eliza's jaw tightened. Mr. Rourke and I are friends. Nothing more. And his testimony matches that of Deputy Marshal Cartwright, who arrived shortly after. Are you suggesting a territorial officer is lying? The attorney backed off, sensing he'd overstepped. The judge made notes, his expression unreadable. Caleb testified the next day, his account precise and unemotional. He described the kidnapping, the chase, the gunfight. When asked why he'd intervened, he answered simply, because it was the right thing to do. Even though Miss Hart was virtually a stranger to you? Nobody deserves to be murdered for filing legal paperwork, stranger or not. The prosecution rested after 5 days. The defense put up a weak case built on character witnesses who suddenly couldn't remember much about Greer's business practices and accountants, who claimed the books were too complicated to interpret definitively. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts: murder, fraud, conspiracy, theft. The judge sentenced Greer to 20 years at the territorial prison. Hatch got 15. The miners who'd participated got sentences ranging from 5 to 10 years, depending on their level of involvement. Outside the courthouse, Eliza stood in the afternoon sun, feeling something she hadn't felt in months: vindication. Not satisfaction, the cost had been too high for that, but the knowledge that justice, however imperfect, had been served. You did it, Caleb said beside her. We did it.
This story was posted
different
on the
than I
channel
expected.
west of Betrayal.
How so?
Please do not
He
repost it
considered.
in any form.
Emptier. Like winning should feel better than this. Eliza understood. Because winning doesn't bring back the people we lost. Jonathan, Margaret Colby, all the others whose names we'll never know. She started walking toward their horses. But maybe it prevents the next death, the next theft. Maybe that's enough. They rode back to Red Ridge as the sun set, painting the sky in colors that looked less like blood than they had weeks before. The town had changed in their absence. Deputies had established order, running off the worst of Greer's loyalists, installing a temporary council that actually seemed interested in governing. The mine had reopened under territorial supervision, with wages doubled and safety conditions improving. Children played in the street without fear. Businesses stayed open past dark. It was still rough, still frontier, but the edge of malice had dulled. Mrs. Chen greeted them outside the general store. Judge ruled in your favor, I heard. He did. And the trust? Being established next week. Deputy Marshal Cartwright is overseeing the paperwork. Eliza dismounted, her muscles protesting days in the saddle. Redridge is going to get its school, its hospital, and fair wages, whether it wants them or not. Mrs. Chen smiled, a rare sight. Some people are already complaining. Say you're trying to change too much too fast. Those people can complain to the territorial government. I'm done caring what corrupt men think. Not all the complainers are corrupt. Some are just scared of change. Then they'll have to get used to being scared. Eliza softened slightly. But we'll try to bring them along, show them that change doesn't have to mean destruction. Good luck with that. Eliza headed upstairs to her room, every step reminding her she wasn't as young as she used to be. Inside, she found her belongings exactly as she'd left them, Mrs. Chen having repaired what the kidnappers had destroyed. On the desk sat a letter, sealed with official wax. She opened it carefully, recognizing the territorial seal. It was from the governor's office, brief and formal. In recognition of her service to justice and her generous establishment of the Redridge Trust, Eliza Hart was hereby appointed Special Education Advisor to the territory, with authority to establish standards for frontier schools and teacher training. The position came with a salary that made her teaching wage look like pocket change, along with official backing for any educational initiative she deemed necessary. Eliza read it twice, then set it down and laughed. She'd given away $4 million and somehow ended up with more power than money could have bought. The irony wasn't lost on her. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Caleb stood there, holding 2 cups of what smelled like actual coffee instead of the usual burnt chicory. Mrs. Chen said you'd want this. She was right. Eliza took the cup, gestured to the letter. Apparently I'm now a territorial official. Caleb read the letter over her shoulder. Special Education Advisor. That's impressive. That's terrifying. I have no idea what I'm doing. You managed to dismantle a criminal empire and redistribute its wealth for public good. I think you'll figure out education policy. She sipped her coffee, letting the warmth spread. Will you stay? In Redridge, I mean. Help with the trust? Thinking about it? Still? Yeah. He sat on the edge of her desk. My ranch is quiet, simple, no complications. Also lonely. There's that too. He looked at her. But staying here means getting involved, caring about what happens to people, having stake in something beyond my own survival. Is that so bad? It is if those people get killed because I cared too much or too little. His voice roughened. I've lost people before, Eliza. Soldiers I trained, friends I trusted, a woman I thought I'd marry, back before the war made me into this. He gestured at himself. Caring is how you get hurt, and not caring is how you die alone. Better alone than watching everyone you love get destroyed. Eliza set down her coffee and moved to stand in front of him. I'm not asking you to love anyone. I'm asking you to help build something that matters. There's a difference. Is there? I think so. Hope so. She met his eyes. But if you want to go back to your ranch, I'll understand. No judgment. You've already done more than anyone could ask. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, weighing options only he could see. Then he stood, finishing his coffee in one long drink. I'll stay through winter, help get the trust established, make sure the mine operations are clean. After that, we'll see. It wasn't a commitment, but it was something. Eliza took it for what it was worth. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I'm terrible at administrative work. Then you'll learn. I did. He almost smiled. Yeah, you did. He left, and Eliza stood alone in her room, looking out at Redridge as night fell. The town looked different now, less hostile, like a wild animal that had finally stopped baring its teeth. Somewhere out there, 17 children were sleeping, dreaming whatever dreams children had. Tomorrow they'd wake up and go to school in a building that wouldn't burn down, taught by a teacher who wouldn't disappear. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork and politics. Eliza met with territorial officials, drafted trust bylaws, interviewed candidates for the trust board. She fought with bureaucrats who wanted to redirect funds, argued with mining executives who resented the new wage requirements, and personally fired 3 accountants who tried to embezzle from the trust before it was even fully funded. Caleb handled the mining operations with brutal efficiency, running off supervisors who cut corners on safety and installing people who actually knew what they were doing. He also started training a local militia, not to intimidate, he was careful to explain, but to protect the town from the kind of corruption that had nearly destroyed it. Red Ridge resisted at first. Change always met resistance. But slowly, grudgingly, the town began to adapt. The new school opened in October, twice the size of the old one, with real desks and books and supplies that didn't come from Eliza's personal funds. 23 children enrolled the first week, 30 by the second. The hospital followed in November, a modest building staffed by a doctor imported from Denver and 2 nurses who actually wanted to help rather than take bribes to falsify death certificates. Mine wages increased. Working conditions improved. Men stopped dying in preventable cave-ins. It wasn't perfect. Arguments still erupted over how the trust money should be spent. Some families refused to send their children to school, suspicious of education they hadn't asked for. A few die-hard Greer loyalists tried to start trouble, though they scattered quickly when Caleb's militia appeared. But it was better. Measurably, undeniably better. On a cold December morning, Eliza stood outside the new schoolhouse watching children arrive, bundled against the wind, their breath pluming in the frozen air. Sarah Watts waved as she passed. Tommy Drummond nodded, a textbook under his arm. Maria called out a greeting in Spanish and English both. Mrs. Chen appeared beside her, also watching. "You did this? We did this. All of us. Don't be modest. You're the one who refused to run, who fought back when fighting back meant dying." Mrs. Chen's voice was soft. "Margaret Colby would have been proud." Eliza thought about the woman she'd never met, beaten and broken by men who feared educated women. "I hope so. I hope wherever she is, she knows it got better. It got better because you made it better." They stood in silence, watching the future walk through schoolhouse doors, and Eliza felt something she hadn't felt since Jonathan died. Hope. Not the desperate hope of survival, the quiet hope of progress, of change that might actually last. It was fragile, this hope. Built on foundations still settling, vulnerable to the next corrupt man who wanted power. But it was real, and it was growing, and it was worth protecting. Caleb found her there an hour later, after the children had gone inside and the street had emptied. "Trust board wants to meet," he said. "Something about funding for a library." "A library?" Eliza smiled. "Jonathan would have hated that." "Yeah, well, Jonathan was an idiot." Caleb said it without malice. "Coming?" "In a minute. I want to watch them learn for a bit." He joined her at the window, both of them looking at children bent over slates, struggling with letters and numbers that would give them power their parents never had. "You ever wonder if it's worth it?" Caleb asked. "All the fighting, the risk, the people who hate you for it?" "Every day." "And?" "And then I see this." She gestured at the classroom. Children learning, people healing, a town becoming something other than a wound. She looked at him. "That's worth fighting for." Caleb nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess it is." They stood together in the winter cold, watching the future take shape, and neither of them mentioned that somewhere in the last few months they'd stopped being 2 isolated people and become something else. Partners, maybe. Friends, certainly. And possibly,
This story was
eventually,
posted on
something
the
more.
channel west of
But that was
Betrayal.
a question for another
Please
day.
do not
Winter
repost it
settled
in
over
any
Red
form.
Ridge like a blanket that couldn't quite keep out the cold. Snow came in January, transforming the town's dust into something almost beautiful, hiding the scars under white that wouldn't last. Eliza watched it from her window above the general store, coffee in hand, thinking about how deceptive snow could be, covering ugliness without actually fixing anything. The trust board meeting that afternoon proved her point. 5 men sat around a table in the new town hall, faces ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. They were supposed to be advisors, helping allocate funds responsibly. Instead, they spent 2 hours arguing about whether a library was a waste of money that should go to expanding the mine. "Books don't feed families," said Ernest Blackwell, a mine foreman who'd survived the corruption purge by keeping his head down and his mouth shut. "Silver does." Eliza set down her pen with deliberate care. "Books teach children to read contracts so they don't get cheated. They teach mathematics so miners can verify their wages. They teach history so people understand how corruption happens and how to prevent it. She met his gaze. The mind feeds families this year. Education feeds them for generations. Pretty words from someone who's never worked underground. You're right, I haven't, but I've worked in poverty and violence and circumstances where education was the only thing that gave me a way out. She leaned forward. Your children deserve that same chance, Mr. Blackwell. Or would you prefer they spend their lives in the dark, never knowing there's more to life than digging? Blackwell's face reddened, but he didn't have an answer. Caleb, who'd been silent until now, spoke from his position by the door. Vote. Library or no library? Let's stop wasting time. The vote was 3-2 in favor. Not unanimous, but enough. After the meeting, Eliza found Caleb outside, smoking a cigarette and staring at nothing. She'd learned that meant he was thinking about things he didn't want to discuss. You didn't have to cut them off like that, she said. Yes, I did. We've been in that room for 2 hours debating something that should have taken 5 minutes. He took a drag, exhaled smoke into the cold air. Some of these men are still looking for ways to profit. They don't care about education or progress. They care about finding the next scheme. Not all of them. Enough of them. He flicked ash into the snow. You're trying to change human nature, Eliza. That's a fight you can't win. Maybe. But I can change circumstances. Make it harder to be corrupt and easier to be honest. She pulled her coat tighter. That's something. Caleb looked at her and something in his expression softened. You really believe that? I have to. Otherwise, what am I doing here? He stubbed out the cigarette against the building wall. Building something that'll probably get torn down the minute you leave. Then I won't leave. Everyone leaves eventually. There was weight in those words. History that Caleb never talked about. Eliza wanted to push, to ask what had happened to make him so certain that permanence was impossible. But she'd learned that pushing Caleb meant watching him retreat behind walls she couldn't breach. So instead she said, Then I guess I'll have to prove you wrong. He didn't respond, just walked back toward the stable where he kept his horse. Eliza watched him go, recognizing the distance he was creating, and wondered how long he'd keep running from whatever was chasing him. The library opened in February, a small building next to the school, stocked with books donated from Denver and volumes Eliza had purchased with her new territorial salary. It wasn't much, maybe 200 books total, half of them damaged or outdated. But it was a start. Tommy Drummond was the first person through the door. He stood in the entrance, looking at the shelves like they held secrets he'd been searching for his whole life. His father was in prison, his mother had taken up with a miner from the next town over, and Tommy lived with his uncle now, a man who drank less and hit never. Can I just... He gestured at the books. Can I just look? You can borrow them, Eliza said. That's what libraries are for. I don't have money. You don't need money. You just need to bring them back when you're done. Tommy reached for a book, hesitated, pulled back. What if I break it? Then you'll tell me, and we'll figure it out together. Eliza pulled a ledger from her desk. What interests you? Don't know. Everything, I guess. He finally took a book, a worn copy of Treasure Island with water damage on the cover. Is this any good? It's about pirates and buried gold, and a boy who's braver than he thinks he is. She wrote his name in the ledger. I think you'll like it. Tommy left clutching that book like it might disappear if he loosened his grip. Eliza watched him through the window, seeing something shift in his posture, a straightening that hadn't been there before. Mrs. Chen appeared beside her. You gave that boy hope. I gave him a book. Same thing sometimes. Mrs. Chen set down a basket of food she'd brought. Bread, cheese, dried meat. Eat. You're getting thin. I eat. Not enough. Mrs. Chen started unpacking the basket. You work too hard, sleep too little, carry too much. Same pattern as Margaret Colby before She stopped. Before what? Mrs. Chen's hands stilled. Before she broke. Before the weight of trying to save everyone crushed her into nothing. She looked at Eliza directly. You cannot save this town alone. You will kill yourself trying. I'm not alone. I have the trust board, the territorial backing. You have bureaucrats and politicians who will abandon you the moment it's inconvenient. Mrs. Chen's voice sharpened. You have one man who might actually care, and you're too stubborn to let him help properly. Eliza knew she meant Caleb. He helps. He's on the trust board. He runs the militia. He stands at the edges and pretends he's not involved. That's not help. That's a man waiting to run. Mrs. Chen pushed the basket toward Eliza. Talk to him. Really talk. Before he disappears and you're left doing this alone. She left before Eliza could respond. That night, Eliza found Caleb at his ranch. She'd never been there before. He'd kept that boundary firm. But Mrs. Chen was right. They needed to talk, and talking required getting past the walls Caleb had built between himself and anything resembling commitment. The ranch was smaller than she'd expected, a cabin and barn surrounded by fencing that had seen better days. Caleb's horse stood in the corral, along with two others he'd acquired somewhere. Smoke rose from the chimney. She knocked. Caleb opened the door, surprise flickering across his face before settling into wariness. Something wrong? Can I come in? He hesitated, then stepped aside. The cabin was sparse. A bed, a table, 2 chairs, a stove. No decorations, no personal items except for a rifle rack holding 3 weapons and a single photograph on the mantel. Eliza couldn't see the photograph clearly from where she stood. Coffee? Caleb moved to the stove without waiting for an answer. Please. They sat at the table, cups between them, silent stretching. Eliza had rehearsed what she wanted to say during the ride over, but now the words felt inadequate. Mrs. Chen thinks you're going to leave, she said finally. Caleb's expression didn't change. Mrs. Chen talks too much. Is she right? I don't know. He stared into his coffee. I said I'd stay through winter. It's still winter. Barely. Spring's coming. Then I guess we'll find out what I decide when spring comes. Eliza felt frustration rising. Why won't you just commit? To the town, to the trust, to... She stopped herself. To what? She met his eyes. To me. To this. To whatever we're building together. The words hung between them, more honest than she'd intended. Caleb set down his cup. You want to know why I won't commit? Because everyone I've ever committed to is dead. His voice was level, emotionless. My parents died of fever when I was 12. The woman I was engaged to married someone else while I was at war. My best friend took a bullet meant for me and bled out in my arms. The soldiers I trained followed me into an ambush because I read the signs wrong, and 15 of them died screaming. He stood, walked to the window. Commitment means caring. Caring means loss. I'm done with loss. Eliza stood too. So you're just going to live alone forever? Help people but never let them close enough to matter? It's safer that way. For who? For them or for you? He turned to face her. Does it matter? Yes. She crossed to him. Because you're not protecting people by staying distant. You're protecting yourself. And I understand that, I really do. But if everyone who'd ever been hurt decided to stop caring, the world would be nothing but isolated people dying alone. Better than caring and watching them die anyway. Is it? Eliza's voice softened. Because from where I'm standing, you look pretty miserable. Caleb's jaw tightened. You don't know anything about me.
This story was
rode into
posted on
gunfire
the
to
channel
save me.
west of Betrayal.
I know you've spent months
Please do
helping
not
rebuild a
repost
town
it
you
in
claim
any
not to
form.
care about. I know you train children in the militia with patience you swear you don't have. She reached for his hand. I know you're terrified of admitting you already care, because that means accepting you might lose again. He pulled his hand away. You should go. Caleb, I said go. His voice was hard now, final. This was a mistake. You coming here, me staying in Red Ridge, all of it. I'll finish out the month, help transition the militia to someone else, and then I'm done. Eliza felt something crack in her chest. So you're running, just like you accused me of doing when I first arrived. I'm surviving. There's a difference. No, there isn't. Running is running, whether you call it survival or self-preservation or anything else. She headed for the door. But you're right about one thing. This was a mistake. I thought you were brave enough to try. I was wrong. She left before he could respond, riding back to Red Ridge through darkness that felt heavier than it had before. The next weeks were tense. Caleb avoided her, conducting trust business through written notes and delegating anything that might require actual conversation. Eliza threw herself into work, expanding the school, planning a teacher training program, anything to avoid thinking about the hollow feeling in her chest. The town noticed. People whispered about the schoolteacher and the rancher, speculating about what had happened between them. Some said Caleb had proposed and Eliza refused. Others claimed Eliza had demanded commitment Caleb wouldn't give. The truth was messier and more painful than either rumor. Tommy Drummond approached Eliza in the library one afternoon, returning Treasure Island and looking uncomfortable. "Miss Hart, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do people run away from things they want?" Eliza looked up from the ledger. "What makes you ask that?" "My ma ran away from my pa even though she loved him, said she couldn't watch him destroy himself anymore." Tommy traced the edge of the desk with his finger. "And Mr. Rourke, he's running from you even though—" He stopped, embarrassed. "Even though what?" "Even though anyone with eyes can see he cares about you. My uncle says Mr. Rourke looks at you the way men look at home." Tommy met her gaze. "So why's he running?" Out of the mouths of children came questions adults spent lifetimes avoiding. Eliza set down her pen. "Because sometimes caring about something means accepting you might lose it, and some people would rather run than face that possibility." "That's stupid." "Yes, but it's also human." She pulled a new book from the shelf behind her. "People are complicated, Tommy. We want things and fear them at the same time. We run towards safety and away from happiness because happiness feels dangerous." Tommy took the book, something about Greek myths. "You think he'll come back?" "I don't know. That's his choice to make." "What about you? What will you choose?" Eliza hadn't expected that question. "I'll choose to stay, to keep building this, with or without him." Tommy nodded, like she'd confirmed something he already knew. "That's brave." "Or stubborn." "Same thing, sometimes." He left, and Eliza sat alone in the library, surrounded by books that promised happy endings, wondering if real life worked that way. Spring came in March with mud and rain and the kind of cold that got into your bones. The trust board voted to expand the hospital, fund 3 new teachers, and establish a scholarship program for children wanting higher education. Progress, undeniable and real. But Eliza couldn't enjoy it. Every meeting without Caleb felt incomplete. Every decision made without his input felt hollow. She told herself she didn't need him, that the work was what mattered, not the man. She was lying, and she knew it, Mrs. Chen found her crying in the library one evening, surrounded by paperwork, finally breaking under the weight of everything she'd been carrying. "He left this morning," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "Packed up his cabin, sold 2 of his horses, heading north," someone said. Eliza wiped her eyes, angry at herself for the tears. "Then it's done." "Is it?" "He made his choice. I made mine." Mrs. Chen sat down across from her. "When my husband died, I wanted to die too. 30 years together, and suddenly I was alone in a country that hated me, surrounded by people who saw me as less than human." She folded her hands. "I could have given up, gone back to China, started over somewhere else. But I stayed. Built a life from nothing. And you know what I learned?" "What?" "That staying is easy when you're alone. When you have no one to disappoint, no one to lose, no one who can hurt you." Mrs. Chen's eyes were fierce. "The hard part is staying when you have someone worth staying for. When leaving would be easier than fighting for what you want." "He's the one who left." "Is he? Or did you let him go without fighting because fighting meant risking rejection?" Eliza opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Mrs. Chen was right. She'd let Caleb walk away because some part of her had expected him to, had prepared for it, had built walls of her own to soften the blow. "What do I do? What do you want to do?" Eliza thought about that. About Caleb and his scars, his fear, his stubborn refusal to let anyone close. About herself and her own fears, her own walls. About the life they could build if either of them was brave enough to try. "I want to fight," she said finally. "I want to tell him he's an idiot for running, and I'm an idiot for letting him, and we're both too damaged to make this easy, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try." Mrs. Chen smiled. Then go say that. He's already gone. So catch up. You have a horse. Use it. Eliza stared at her. You're telling me to chase after a man who rejected me. I'm telling you to fight for what you want the same way you fought for this town. Mrs. Chen stood. But do it quickly, before he gets too far ahead and pride makes you both stupid enough to give up. Eliza grabbed her coat. She found Caleb 5 miles north of Red Ridge, his horse lame from a thrown shoe, standing beside the road looking furious and miserable in equal measure. He turned when he heard her approach, surprise and something else crossing his face. Horse threw a shoe, he said, like that explained everything. Eliza dismounted. Or maybe the universe decided you were being an idiot and intervened. I'm not being an idiot, I'm being practical. You're being a coward. His jaw set. I told you why I can't. I know what you told me, about loss and fear and everyone you've cared about dying. She moved closer. But you know what I see? A man who survived all that, who kept going despite losing everything, who's strong enough to build a life from nothing but too scared to let anyone into it. That's not, yes, it is. Her voice rose. You talk about commitment like it's a death sentence, but you've already committed, Caleb, to the town, to the children, to me whether you want to admit it or not. Running doesn't change that. It just makes you lonely while you do it. He looked away. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. Make me understand why a man who's faced down armed killers is terrified of admitting he cares about someone. The silence stretched. When Caleb spoke again, his voice was raw. Because caring gives people power to destroy you, not with bullets or knives, but by leaving, by dying, by choosing someone else. He met her eyes. My fiancée sent a letter while I was at war, said she couldn't wait anymore, that she'd married a shopkeeper from Denver. I read that letter while burying men who'd died following my orders, and I decided right then that caring wasn't worth the pain. And how's that worked out for you? I'm alive. That's something. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, you're barely living. Eliza stepped closer. I'm not asking you to stop being afraid. Fear makes sense after what you've been through, but I am asking you to try anyway, to take the risk that maybe, just maybe, not everyone leaves. You don't know that. No, but neither do you. The only certainty is that running guarantees you'll be alone. She reached for his hand, and this time he didn't pull away. I'm damaged too, Caleb. My husband beat me, drank himself to death, and left me with nothing but debt and trauma. I have every reason to stay alone, to never trust a man again. But I'm standing here asking you to try with me anyway, because the alternative is dying alone and pretending we chose it. Caleb's hand tightened on hers. What if I hurt you? What if you don't? What if we actually manage to build something good? That's a hell of a gamble. So is crossing the street. So is teaching children in a town that wanted me dead. So is everything worth doing. She smiled slightly. Besides, I already gave away $4 million. I'm clearly not good at playing it safe. Despite everything, Caleb laughed. It was rough and broken, but real. You're crazy. Probably. Is that a yes? He was quiet for a long moment, weighing options only he could see. Then he said, My horse needs a new shoe. That's not an answer. It means I'm not going anywhere until he's fixed, which means I'll be in Red Ridge at least another day. He met her eyes.
This story was posted on the channel west of the trail. Please do not repost it
It wasn't
in
the
any
declaration
form.
Eliza wanted, but it was a start. Come on, she said, taking his horse's reins. Let's get you both home. They rode back to Red Ridge together as the sun set, and if anyone noticed that the rancher who'd left that morning returned with the school teacher, they kept it to themselves. 3 months later, Red Ridge looked like a town instead of a wound. The school had 48 students. The hospital treated an average of 20 patients a week. The mine operated safely and paid fair wages. The library circulated books faster than Eliza could acquire new ones, and Caleb Rourke had stayed. He'd moved his operation closer to town, taking a house near the edge of Red Ridge that gave him space but kept him connected. He ran the militia with discipline but not cruelty, training men to defend without becoming oppressors. He sat on the trust board and argued with Eliza about funding priorities, occasionally winning when his points were actually good. They didn't live together. Eliza kept her room above the general store, maintaining independence that mattered to both of them. But they had dinner together most nights, working through trust business and personal conversation in equal measure. It wasn't perfect. They argued about money, about trust decisions, about how much help Eliza should accept versus demanding. Caleb still had days where the walls went up and he retreated into silence. Eliza still worked too hard and carried too much. But they were trying. That counted for something. On a warm June morning, Eliza stood in front of the school watching the first graduation ceremony Red Ridge had seen in 5 years. 12 students, all of them able to read, write, and calculate well enough to navigate the world beyond mining. Tommy Drummond stood at the front, having tested at the highest level. He'd be leaving for Denver in the fall, attending a technical school on a scholarship from the trust. His uncle stood in the crowd, proud and sober. Sarah Watts received a certificate for completing primary education. Her mother cried. Maria presented her mathematics scores to the trust board, earning a secondary scholarship for advanced study. One by one, children who'd been told they weren't worth educating proved those voices wrong. After the ceremony, as families celebrated and children showed off their certificates, Caleb found Eliza behind the school. "You did it," he said. "We did it." She leaned against the wall, exhausted and satisfied. This town said education was impossible. We proved them wrong. More than that, you proved that one person can make a difference, that fighting corruption and demanding better is worth the cost. He stood beside her. That's not nothing. Eliza looked at the children, at the families, at the town that had tried to kill her, and now celebrated progress she'd forced into existence. You know what the hardest part was? What? Believing it would work. Every day I woke up thinking this would be the day it all fell apart, that the trust would be corrupted, or the town would revert, or I'd fail somehow. She turned to face him. I still think that most days, and yet you keep going. Because the alternative is giving up, and I'm too stubborn for that. Caleb smiled, the real smile he saved for moments when his walls were down. Yeah, I noticed. They stood together as the celebration continued, two damaged people who'd somehow built something worth protecting, and Eliza thought about how strange life was, how the worst moments could lead to the best outcomes if you were brave enough or stubborn enough or stupid enough to keep fighting. A week later, Caleb asked her to marry him. They were reviewing mine safety reports in the trust office, surrounded by paperwork that made Eliza's eyes cross, when he set down his pen and said, I've been thinking. Dangerous habit. About us, about what we're building. He didn't look at her. About whether making it official makes sense. Eliza stopped reading. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Depends on what you think I'm asking. Caleb. He finally met her eyes. I'm not good at this. At feelings and declarations and romance, but I know I don't want to be without you. I know that when I think about the future, you're in it. And I know that's probably not the proposal you deserve, but it's what I've got. It was the least romantic proposal in history. No flowers, no ring, no bending knee, just a damaged man admitting he wanted a future with her, offered with all the grace of someone defusing a bomb. Eliza loved him for it. Yes, she said. He blinked. Yes? Yes. I'll marry you, even though your proposal was terrible and you look like you're about to throw up. I'm not... He stopped. Okay, maybe a little. She laughed, and he did too, and they sat in that office surrounded by mine reports and trust documents, planning a future neither of them had expected to want. They married in August, a small ceremony in the library, because Eliza refused to use the church that had supported Greer. Mrs. Chen stood as witness. Tommy Drummond, home for the summer before leaving for Denver, walked Eliza down the aisle in place of the father she hadn't spoken to in years. The vows were simple. Caleb promised to stay even when staying was hard. Eliza promised to let him help even when accepting help felt like weakness. They promised to build something together, knowing it might fall apart, trying anyway. The celebration afterward was loud and chaotic, the whole town turning out to witness the school teacher and the rancher making their partnership official. People drank too much and danced badly and told stories about the early days when Eliza had arrived and Caleb had watched from the edges. As the sun set and the party continued, Eliza found herself on the edge of the crowd, watching Red Ridge celebrate. Mrs. Chen appeared beside her. Having regrets? About marrying him? No. About staying here, fighting this fight. Eliza thought about that. About Jonathan's death and Margaret Colby's fate. About the fire and the kidnapping and standing in front of armed men who wanted her dead. About every moment when leaving would have been easier than staying. No regrets, she said finally. It was hard and terrifying, and I nearly died multiple times. But look at what came from it. She gestured at the town. Children learning, families thriving, a future that isn't just survival. You think it'll last? I think it'll last as long as people fight for it. Nothing good survives without effort. Eliza smiled. But I'm stubborn, Caleb's mean, and we've built enough momentum that backsliding will be harder than moving forward. That's optimistic. That's realistic. Change is fragile, but it's also persistent. Like weeds in a garden, you have to work to kill it once it takes root. Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. Margaret Colby would be proud of you. I hope so. I hope wherever she is, she knows it got better. They stood in silence, watching the future dance in the fading light. 5 years later, Red Ridge was unrecognizable. The trust had funded 2 more schools, a proper hospital with surgical facilities, and a library branch in the mining district. Literacy rates had tripled. Child mortality had dropped by half. The mine operated under strict safety regulations and paid wages that allowed families to thrive instead of just survive. Eliza ran the territorial education program from an office in Red Ridge, training teachers and establishing standards across the frontier. She traveled sometimes, visiting schools in other towns, but she always came home. Home was a house on the edge of town, modest but comfortable, shared with a husband who still had bad days but mostly had good ones. They'd added a room last year, preparing for a child that arrived in March, a daughter they named Margaret, after the woman whose suffering had paved the way for Eliza's success. Caleb had expanded the militia into a territorial peacekeeping force, training men to prevent the kind of corruption that had nearly destroyed Red Ridge. He still carried scars, physical and emotional, but he'd stopped running from them. On Margaret's first birthday, they held a party in the library. The whole town showed up, bringing gifts and food and stories about how much had changed since that day 5 years ago when a widowed schoolteacher had refused to back down. Tommy Drummond attended, home from Denver, where he'd become an engineer. He brought blueprints for a water system he wanted to install in Red Ridge, funded by the trust, that would bring clean water to every building. Sarah Watts came with her mother, showing off a teaching certificate she'd earned. She'd be taking over one of the new schools in the fall. Maria presented accounting books for the trust, having become the organization's financial officer, ensuring the money went where it was supposed to go. The children Eliza had taught were becoming the leaders she'd hoped they would be. As the party wound down and guests started leaving, Caleb found Eliza in the back of the library, nursing Margaret and looking tired but content. "You did it," he said, echoing words from years ago. "We did it. All of us." She looked up at him. "Think it'll last?" "Does it matter? Even if it all falls apart tomorrow, we proved it was possible. That one person refusing to quit can change everything." He sat beside her. "That's worth something." Eliza thought about that, about the journey from widowed schoolteacher to territorial official, about the town that had tried to kill her and now celebrated her daughter, about the man who'd learned to stay when every instinct told him to run. "Yeah," she said finally.
This story was posted on the channel west
Outside
of Betrayal.
Red Ridge settled
Please
into
do not
evening,
repost
a
it
town
in any
transformed
form.
by stubbornness and courage and the refusal to accept that corruption was inevitable. It wasn't perfect. Nowhere ever was. But it was better, measurably and undeniably better. And that was enough. Because the thing about change was that it didn't require perfection. It required people willing to fight for better even when better seemed impossible. It required standing up when standing up meant risking everything. It required believing that one voice refusing to be silenced could inspire others to speak. Eliza had been that voice. And the echo of it had changed not just Red Ridge but the entire territory, proving that power built on fear was no match for conviction built on hope. Years from now, people would tell the story of the school teacher who'd fought a corrupt town and won. They'd make her into a legend, smooth out the rough edges, forget the fear and doubt, and moments when she'd nearly given up. But the truth was messier and more human. The truth was a woman who'd been scared every single day but had fought anyway. Who'd made mistakes and lost sleep and cried more times than she'd admit. Who'd been damaged and imperfect and stubbornly, impossibly determined to make things better. The truth was that heroes weren't born. They were ordinary people who refused to quit when quitting would have been easier. And sometimes, if they were lucky and brave and stubborn enough, they won. Not perfectly, not without cost, but enough to matter, enough to change the world.